Story 1.
Husband falsely accused of cheating gets epic revenge after catching wife flirting at a party. Hey, who's that handsome guy? Both Cindy's husband, Jim, and their friend Barbara were taken aback by her question even before they stepped through the backyard gate. Barbara followed Cindy's gaze and spotted a friend of Adam, Cindy's brother-in-law. Just so you know, I'm right here," Jim reminded his wife. "What? Can't I admire a good-looking guy when I see one?" she retorted. "Well, if you're going to check out some guy, I'd prefer if you kept it to yourself." Jim responded a bit bluntly before shifting his focus to their host. "Hi, Barb, sorry about that." Barbara and her husband Tony were hosting an outdoor birthday party for their daughter, who had just turned 13. Barbara saw them approaching but hadn't greeted them yet. She chose to overlook Cindy's question. "No worries, you two. Come on in," she said, still holding the gate. "Where should these go?" Jim asked, holding up a case of beer. "There are a few coolers by the tree filled with ice, Jim. Some have soft drinks for the kids, but the others are for the beer. Just pick an empty one. Gifts go on that table over there," she directed Cindy, who was carrying a nicely wrapped box. Tony, the CO host, spotted them and came over to welcome them. "Hey, welcome you two," he said, kissing Cindy on the cheek. "Jimbo, let me take that," as he reached for the case. Cindy made another attempt. "Hey, Tony, who's the handsome guy sitting over there with your brother?" Tony, a bit slow to catch on and unaware of the previous conversation, looked where she had gestured. "Oh, his name's Bob something. He works construction with Adam. Why, do you know him?" "No, but I wouldn't mind," she replied. "I mean, what a hunk." Tony glanced at Jim, surprised and not fully understanding the situation. He tried to lighten the mood. "Watch out, Jim. Sounds like she's on the prowl," he joked. Jim was just as surprised. It seemed like his wife was trying to make him jealous for some reason, but he didn't want to ruin the party. So he chuckled it off and forced a smile. "Yeah, sounds like she's ready to trade me in for a younger guy." "That'll be the day," Barbara quipped, giving Jim's arm a playful slap. "Well, come on in, you guys," Tony said. "Barb, why don't you show Cindy where to put the gifts?" When Barbara saw the expression on her husband's face, she understood exactly what he was implying. He hoped she would inquire about Cindy's behavior. En route to the gift table, she lowered her voice to ensure no one else could overhear. "Okay, Cin, what's happening? Did you and Jim have an argument or something?" "What do you mean? Don't give me that. We've all been friends for a long time, and I've never heard you speak like that in front of Jim. Something's up." "I'm just giving him a taste of his own medicine. He's out all day flirting with every pretty girl he sees. You know Linda Kingston?" "Yeah. She saw Jim in a restaurant a few days ago. He obviously didn't notice her. She told me the waitress came over and kissed him. They talked and laughed through lunch, flirting the whole time. Cindy, Jim's a friendly, outgoing guy. That's just his personality. Having a girl kiss you is more than being friendly, Barb. It's crossing a line, and you know it. Tony kissed you on the cheek a minute ago. That's different. We've been friends for years. This is some waitress he flirts with when he goes there. I don't like it, and it definitely doesn't pass the wife test." "The wife test?" "Yeah, you know, guys use it all the time, but for them, it's the husband test. A wife shouldn't do anything in public or private that she wouldn't do in front of her husband. Well, what's good for the goose, as they say. So you chose my daughter's birthday party to give Jim a hard time? Don't worry, I won't do anything drastic. I wasn't even thinking about it until I saw Adam's friend over there. He's perfect. I just want to teach Jim a lesson. Well, do me a favor and don't start any fights, okay?" "I won't. Besides, look at that guy, he's built like a tank. Jim would be crazy to mess with him." "All right. I see more guests coming up the walk, so I have to go do my meet and greet thing. I'll catch up with you later. Remember, no fights, okay?" "No fights, Barb, I promise." She glanced around and spotted Jennifer, the guest of honor, chatting with her friends. She decided to go over and wish her a happy birthday. Jim had just finished helping Tony with the beer and had the same idea. They both arrived at the same time. Cindy spoke first. "Congrats, honey. You're officially a teenager. You can really give your parents a hard time now," she joked. "That goes for me too, Jen," Jim added. "The congrats part, I mean." "I'm not sure about the giving your folks a hard time part," he teased. Jennifer laughed at Jim's joke. It was well known in their circle that she'd had a crush on him since she was a toddler. "Thanks," she replied, while giving Cindy a hug and Jim a kiss on the cheek. "These are my friends, Coral, Kathy, and Debbie," she introduced. They chatted with Jen and her friends briefly, but Cindy was eager to proceed with her plan to teach Jim a lesson. "Hey, sweetie," she addressed the birthday girl. "I'm going to go say hi to your uncle. Catch you later." Jim was about to accompany her when he noticed Tony signaling to him. As Cindy began to walk away, he remarked, Behave yourself." She shot him a wicked glance. Approaching Tony, who was still by the coolers, Jim inquired, "What's up, buddy? Just wanted to give you a heads up." Barb talked to Cindy. "Seems like you've been flirting with some waitress. Cindy caught wind of it and has this idea to teach you a lesson. I'm guessing that's what all this hunk talk is about." Jim pondered for a moment. "I have no idea what she's talking about. I haven't flirted with any waitress that I'm aware of. Did she mention where or who supposedly saw me? I'm not sure, she didn't specify, but I think she's planning to use Bob to make you jealous, so try to stay cool, okay?" Meanwhile, as Tony and Jim conversed, Cindy approached her target. "Hi, Adam." "Hey, Cindy, how's it going?" "All right, I guess. Who's your handsome friend?" Adam was taken aback while his friend stood and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Bob. I assume you were talking about me, right?" he said with a charming grin. "Who else?" she replied. "Hey, Cindy," Adam interjected. "Where's Jim?" "He's over there chatting with your brother. I'd love one of those," she said, pointing to the beer Bob held. "Hey, Adam, why don't you be a gentleman and grab the lady a beer while we get to know each other better?" Not wanting to be rude, Adam obliged. As soon as he headed for the coolers, Bob offered Cindy his now vacant seat. As she sat down, she glanced over to see her husband glaring at her. Seeing his reaction only fueled her confidence that her plan was working. She turned to engage in conversation with her new acquaintance. Meanwhile, when Adam reached the coolers, he approached Tony and Jim. "Hey, what's up with Cindy?" "Why, what happened?" Jim inquired. "She's cozying up to Bob over there." "Who's he anyway?" Jim asked. "He works with me. We're on that big high-rise downtown. I've known him about 6 months. Seems all right, but he's a bit of a ladies' man, and I wouldn't trust him around women." "He didn't bring a date?" Jim asked. "Nah, it was sort of a last-minute thing. He was supposed to play golf today. We got off work last night around, and he got a text canceling. Started complaining about having nothing to do today, so I invited him to the party at least." Jim now understood what his wife was up to, though he wasn't sure how to handle it. He knew Cindy well. Once she got an idea in her head, she wouldn't let it go until she made her point. Ignoring her might push her further, but confronting her might provoke Bob. He aimed to avoid that scenario at all costs. "Adam, do me a favor, will you? Just keep an eye on things. Let me know if it starts to get out of hand." Adam acknowledged Jim's instructions and grabbed a cold beer from the cooler before returning to where Bob and Cindy were engaged in conversation. Handing Cindy her beer and pulling up another chair, Adam felt it was time to interject. Hoping Bob would catch the hint, he mentioned having seen the pictures Jim took of the lumberyard fire and praised his talent, wondering if Jim planned to enter the press photographers contest again that year. Though slightly annoyed by the interruption, Cindy politely replied that she assumed Jim would participate. She then informed Bob that her husband worked as a photographer for the Tribune and had won several awards at a state contest for press photographers the previous year. Bob responded with a hint of disdain, acknowledging Jim's presence across the yard. Cindy confirmed it was indeed Jim, a response delivered with a dismissive tone that didn't go unnoticed by Bob or Adam. Bob shifted the conversation, expressing his enjoyment of working with his hands and constructing enduring structures. He then directed a question to Adam, asking for validation, to which Adam could only respond with agreement. Assuming Bob had effectively shut down the conversation about her husband, Cindy immediately resumed chatting with Bob, essentially excluding Adam from the discussion. He felt foolish. He'd heard Bob use that same line about working with his hands on women in bars before. It always seemed to impress them, and here Adam had unwittingly given Bob an opportunity. Feeling he was doing more damage than good, Adam excused himself to wish his niece a happy birthday for what felt like the 20th time. Jim circulated, mingling with the others while closely observing Cindy and her companion. Although none of the men mentioned his wife's interaction with another man, the women began to gossip. Jim overheard Jenny discussing the situation with her friends, mentioning that the man Cindy was with worked as a newspaper photographer. She added that her dad commented on how photographers often find themselves in various challenging situations due to their job. Jenny expressed surprise that Jim hadn't intervened physically. Jim chuckled to himself. It wasn't really Bob's fault after all, it was his wife's. And as frustrated as he sometimes felt, he'd never resort to violence against her or any other woman. Glancing over, he noticed an empty beer bottle next to Cindy's chair, and another in her hand already. She tended to drink more when she was nervous. This wasn't good. Bob had 3 empty bottles beside his chair. Just then, Tony mentioned that everyone seemed to be getting hungry. As he stood by the grill, Jim, preoccupied with Cindy, hadn't even noticed the enticing aroma of grilling meat. Tony then announced the food options available, including burgers, brats, and chicken patties, along with various sides on the nearby table for everyone to help themselves. Jim thought it might be a good opportunity to separate Bob from his wife. Perhaps they could find a quiet corner to eat, and he could learn more about this person he was supposedly flirting with. As he turned toward them, he saw the potential lovebirds setting their beers down beside their chairs and standing up. Apparently, Bob had decided that Cindy was his for the day and possessively took her by the elbow. Not happening, Jim muttered to himself. He quickly walked over. "Excuse me, could you remove your hand from my wife?" Bob immediately released Cindy's arm and raised both hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Sorry," he half-chuckled. We're just heading to get some food." "Yeah, well, I can handle it from here, thanks," Jim retorted angrily. He grasped Cindy's other elbow and led her over to the food table. "What's gotten into you?" Cindy questioned. That was incredibly rude. Ignoring his wife's remark, Jim guided her in front of him as they joined the food line. "Grab some food," he stated flatly. "You and I are going to have a talk over by the shed while we eat." Observing the confrontation between Jim and Bob, Adam seized the chance to speak to his colleague, now alone for the first time in a while. "What are you doing?" he asked, irritated. "She's married to one of my brother's closest friends. Leave her alone." "Hey man, you should be telling her to leave me alone. She's the one hitting on me. I'm just being polite." "Polite, my foot. Seriously, Bob, cut it out. Look, if you think you stand a chance with her, forget it. She's using you to get back at Jim over some waitress. Stay out of it. Listen, married or not, I've never turned down a beautiful woman like that in my life. I know women, and I think you're mistaken about her using me. She's genuinely interested, I can tell. I think you should leave. This is my niece's birthday party, and I don't want any trouble." All right, I'll back off. If she approaches me again, I'll send her right back to her husband, all right? If you don't, you're out of here, Bob." "I mean it." "Scout's honor," he responded, holding up the Boy Scout salute. "Now, can I go get something to eat?" "Yeah, go ahead." Cindy wasn't particularly bothered by Jim stepping in between her and Bob. They had only known each other for a few hours, yet he was already becoming overly familiar, not to mention the suggestive comments he was making. Although it amused her to see how easily she could manipulate a man like that when she wanted to, still, she could sense from the way Jim had taken hold of her arm that she had pushed her husband as far as she should. She had promised Barbara no drama, and Jim had proven he wasn't intimidated by Bob's physique. She needed to spend the rest of the day with her husband. She just hoped he had learned his lesson. They both filled their plates with food, and Jim gestured toward the shed, away from the crowd. When they found a quiet spot, he handed Cindy his plate. "Here, hold this while I fetch a couple of chairs. I'll be right back." Despite his anger, Jim remained a gentleman, holding the back of her chair as Cindy sat down. He pulled his own chair alongside so they could talk privately. After a few bites, Jim couldn't contain himself any longer. As he was always direct, he questioned Cindy about the talk regarding him flirting with a waitress, expressing his dislike for such games. Cindy responded by saying she wasn't certain about the exact details, but that it supposedly occurred sometime last week. Jim remarked sarcastically about the vagueness of the information. Cindy then suggested that Jim might have a better understanding of the situation than she did, questioning if he flirts with every waitress. Surprised, Jim interjected, asking if he was told he kissed them. Cindy confirmed this, leading Jim to assert that there were only two possibilities. Either it was a mix-up or someone was feeding her lies, as he had only kissed Cindy since they started dating. Cindy gazed into his eyes. Though she usually felt she could gauge his honesty through his gaze, she wasn't entirely sure, as he had never lied to her as far as she knew. Why would someone claim they saw you kissing a waitress if it wasn't true? "Beats me," he shrugged, taking another bite from his burger. "Since she's your friend, ask her." "How do you know it's a woman?" "It better be a woman. If a male friend told you he saw me kissing a waitress, then you've got your answer." Initially, Cindy entertained the thought that he might have seen her friend in the restaurant and kissed the waitress anyway, disregarding the potential consequences. But she wasn't sure what he meant by his last statement. "What do you mean, if it's a man? I've answered my own question. Simple, if it is a man, he's into you and trying to stir up trouble between us. He's probably hoping to cozy up to you by playing the supportive friend." "That's absurd." "Is it? Think about it. Was it a man?" "No." "All right, then we're back to square one. You'll have to ask your friend why she's misleading you." An uneasy silence followed as they both finished their lunches. When they were done, Jim had a few parting words. "This is Jenny's birthday party, and I won't let it be spoiled by a fight with your friend. So if you keep cozying up to him like you have been, I'll just leave you here, and you can find your own way home. Or you can spend the night with Mr. Muscles, but then you won't have a home to come back to. Understand?" She was taken aback by his intensity. "Jim, calm down. I'm not going home with Bob." I wasn't even considering it. I was just trying to show you what it feels like to have your spouse flirting with someone else, that's all. Well, now you've shown me, so let's end it here. He stood, took his wife's paper plate and empty beer bottle, and walked over to dispose of them. As he turned back, he was relieved to see his wife right by his side. Bob, however, was displeased. He had been sneaking glances at the two of them talking while he sat alone eating his chicken patty. He had no doubt Cindy was genuinely interested. She was eager for action. However, he also acknowledged the need for discretion. Earlier, he had hoped for an opportunity to slip away with her, perhaps to an upstairs bedroom or his car, but now such plans were off the table. They were being watched. He'd have to postpone indulging his desires, at least for now. Despite their underlying tensions, Jim and Cindy were determined to enjoy the rest of the party. She stuck close to him for the remainder of the day, occasionally drifting off to chat with friends but always returning to his side. The only other interaction Cindy had with Bob was during the group rendition of Happy Birthday, when everyone gathered around Jenny's cake. Bob took advantage of the moment to sidle up beside her and discreetly touch her backside while everyone sang. Initially, she assumed it was Jim, but when she glanced over, she saw Bob wearing a smug grin on his face. She was stunned by his audacity. Glancing around quickly to check for any observers, she found everyone focused on Jenny. Normally, she would have reacted by slapping him, but she knew it would only stir up trouble, something she desperately wanted to avoid. Besides, she realized it was partly her own fault for encouraging him. If given the chance, she'd apologize to him and make it clear she wasn't interested. He withdrew his hand to join the applause as the birthday girl effortlessly blew out the candles. Jim glanced over when he heard Bob's voice nearby but saw nothing significant. Certainly, Cindy wasn't about to confess to Jim about Bob's inappropriate behavior during Happy Birthday. Naturally, Bob interpreted her silence as assent. He knew how to manipulate the situation. She had to stay close to her husband to avoid suspicion, but eventually, she would need to slip away to use the restroom indoors. Hopefully, he could catch her alone to arrange a meeting. He'd keep a discreet watch. For those aware of the earlier incident, the perceived threat seemed to have passed. Much to their relief, both Bob and Cindy seemed to be on their best behavior, so, with the possible exception of Jim, they all relaxed and let down their guard. Jim, however, had encountered guys like Bob before, men who thought they were irresistible to women and knew they were rarely dissuaded easily. Just to be cautious, he resolved to continue keeping an eye on the potential troublemaker. The party kicked into high gear after dinner. Tony turned up the outdoor speakers and played background music from Pandora while games were set up. A dartboard was placed on the large oak tree near the shed, and Jenny's friends helped her set up the beanbag toss. Some women gathered card tables for bingo. Jenny and her friends suggested a best-of-3 beanbag game to her parents. Jim and Cindy, Tony warned them about Jenny's skill. Fortunately, the adults won the first game, but the subsequent victories went to the youngsters. After the game, Cindy kissed Jim on the cheek and informed him that she needed to use the restroom and would return shortly. Jim replied that he might challenge Adam to a game of darts. Cindy stopped to chat with friends on her way to the house and was fortunate to find the downstairs restroom unoccupied, so she slipped inside. Adam observed Bob's departure and muttered to himself about it, catching Jim's attention. Jim paused mid-throw and inquired about Adam's comment. Adam clarified, "Bob seems to be leaving without saying goodbye or expressing gratitude for the invitation." Jim turned around and caught a glimpse of Bob exiting through the gate, suggesting that Bob might be upset because Cindy wasn't paying him attention anymore. Adam mentioned that he probably had plans with her. Adam agreed, noting that Bob was skilled at charming women, recounting instances where he had seen Bob leave a bar with attractive women. Jim turned back to the dartboard, taking careful aim when a thought struck him. How would someone enter the house without being seen? They'd leave through the gate, circle around to the front, and enter that way. Handing the darts to Adam, Jim mentioned that he would be right back before making his way toward the back door. Cindy had finished her business and was touching up her makeup. Upon opening the bathroom door, she was stunned to find Bob standing there. Before she could react, he seized her shoulders and pinned her against the doorframe, forcefully locking their lips together. In an instant, had Jim been a split second later, he would have witnessed his wife forcefully pushing Bob away. However, in that moment, she hesitated as she tried to regain her senses. It was then that Jim caught sight of them. He grabbed Bob's shoulder, pulling him away from Cindy, and with a forceful blow to Bob's solar plexus, sent him stumbling back into the washroom, where he collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. As Cindy's brain struggled to process the rapid events, she felt overwhelmed. It all happened so quickly. She turned to find her husband, but he was nowhere to be seen. Panicked, she searched in every direction, calling out for Jim, but he was nowhere in sight. Then she heard the sound of a car starting. Rushing to the front door, Cindy watched as their car backed out and drove off. Realizing how the situation must have appeared, especially given her previous interactions with Bob and ignoring Bob, who was still gasping for breath, she dashed out the back door. The first person she encountered was Adam, who was still waiting for Jim's return, unaware of the unfolding drama. "Adam, you have to drive me home now," she pleaded, her voice trembling with panic. Confused, Adam looked at her, trying to make sense of the situation. "Cindy, what happened? Where's Jim?" "He left. He caught Bob kissing me and—" "What, is he hurt?" "No, Bob's still in the house. I'm not sure if he's hurt or not. Jim punched him really hard." Adam couldn't help but smirk. "Jim punched Bob?" Yeah, please, Adam. I have to get home so I can explain what happened. He was so mad, I'm not sure what he's going to do. I'm afraid he's planning to leave me." "I doubt that, Cindy. He's upset, but I don't think he's that upset. You didn't see him just now, Adam. I was the first one here. I doubt I'll be able to get my car out. I'm sure I'm blocked in. Please, Adam." "All right, give me a second to tell Tony we're leaving, and I'll see if we can get out of here." After briefing Tony, Adam returned, confirming their predicament. "Cindy, you'll have to call a cab." "I can't get out, but you can borrow my car." "Are you serious? Thank you." Grateful and relieved, Cindy hurriedly got into Adam's car, knowing she needed to reach Jim before it was too late. There was only about a foot of space between Adam's car and the garage door. He turned the wheel completely to the right and edged forward until his front bumper gently nudged the door. Then he reversed, turning the wheel the other way until his rear bumper lightly touched the car behind him. He repeated this maneuver several times until he could back out onto his brother's meticulously kept front lawn, leaving only about 2 inches of clearance between his car and the one behind. Throughout the journey, Cindy remained silent, lost in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of her husband's enraged expression from her mind. His fury was unlike anything she had seen before, and his physical reaction was unprecedented. As they approached her driveway, anxiety gripped her. She dreaded facing whatever awaited her at home. Soon they turned into her driveway, with Adam parking behind Jim's car. Adam offered to accompany her inside, but she hesitated briefly before declining, expressing gratitude but insisting that she would handle the situation herself, since she felt responsible for it. Upon exiting the car, she signaled to Adam that she would manage and climb the porch stairs, each step filled with apprehension. Entering the house, she prepared herself for what she might encounter. Jim was nowhere to be seen, and she worried he might be upstairs packing. Just as she began ascending the stairs to confront him, she heard the coffee grinder. A glimmer of hope flickered within her as she thought, "He's making coffee?" Jim, observing her silently from the kitchen doorway, broke the silence by asking if her lover had brought her home. Cindy clarified to Jim that Bob was not her lover, mentioning that the last time she saw him, he was still on the bathroom floor struggling to catch his breath. Jim nodded in response, but remained silent, which unsettled Cindy. She had expected some kind of reaction from him, whether it be anger or embarrassment. Since Jim seemed unwilling to speak, Cindy decided to take the initiative. "He caught me off guard, Jim. I wasn't willingly engaging with him. He ambushed me as soon as I opened the door, pushing me against it and kissing me." "I didn't see you resisting him," Jim shot back. "You intervened before I had the chance. I was stunned. It took me a moment to comprehend what was happening. But you struck him before I could push him away." She still wasn't certain if her husband's behavior indicated genuine calmness, or if it was merely the quiet before a storm. Throughout their conversation, he remained occupied with his tasks. She almost wished he would express his anger openly. His apparent indifference left her feeling anxious. "Well?" she prompted. "Well, what?" he replied, hitting the start button on the coffee maker. "Jim, I've never seen you so angry before. I honestly expected you to be packing your bags when I got home." "Don't tempt me," he growled, his voice rising slightly. "You're damn right I'm angry. That stunt you pulled was immature and disrespectful. The only reason I'm not even more upset is because most people at the party knew what you were doing. But you know what infuriates me more than you making a spectacle of yourself? The fact that you chose to trust one of your shallow friends over me. Have I ever lied to you, huh?" His suppressed anger began to surface. "Have I ever given you a reason to doubt me or be jealous?" "No, never." She had never heard him refer to her friends as shallow before, but she chose not to address it. "Honey, I know how outgoing you are. I've witnessed it. You can strike up a friendship with anyone in minutes, even women. You may not realize it, but I've seen the way they look at you when you walk away. I know they'd be willing to drop their inhibitions in an instant." "Oh, that's ridiculous. You're making me sound like Brad Pitt or something." The situation was escalating. She needed to defuse it before it escalated further. "Jim, all I'm saying is that you have a charming personality. People are drawn to you. I just want you to understand that some women interpret that as flirting. They might think you're available, married or not." She hoped she had eased the tension. "So how does that justify you believing that I go around kissing waitresses and trusting your friend over your husband?" Damn, she thought. She had hoped to avoid that question. Their argument persisted for another 20 minutes without resolution, both refusing to yield on the fundamental issue of trust. Despite their disagreement, neither of them opted to sleep on the couch or in separate rooms. But Cindy sensed that intimacy was out of the question. He wasn't in a forgiving mood, and she wasn't willing to degrade herself by attempting to change his mind. The following Tuesday, Jim met Tony for a drink after work. Jim was already seated and had just taken a sip from his beer when his friend arrived, wearing a wide grin. "Yo, Rocky, how's Adrian?" Tony quipped, attempting a Stallone impression. Jim glanced at his friend. "Isn't Rocky the one who talks like that?" "Yeah, but I can't pull off a Burgess Meredith impression, so you'll have to settle for what you get," he chuckled, taking a seat beside Jim. He ordered a beer. "Seriously, how are things between you two right now?" "We're barely on speaking terms. I'm still angry, and she knows it, so she tends to avoid me." "When are you going to cut her some slack? Most people at the party didn't even realize there was any tension between you two. After you left, some folks were asking about you and Cindy." "What did you tell them?" "I said something unexpected came up and you had to leave." Nobody questioned it. They probably assumed you two were eager to get home and, well, you know. Tony chuckled. "Yeah, well, we haven't exactly been eager to get in bed since the party. Speaking of which, what's the deal with Bob? Is he plotting revenge?" "I doubt it. Adam filled me in on what happened before he drove Cindy home. When I went inside, Bob was just getting back on his feet. He mentioned you landed a sucker punch." "I sure did," Jim interjected. "Well, he was talking about getting back at you, but I warned him to steer clear of you. I told him you're the toughest guy around and that I've seen you take down guys twice your size. I even threw in my favorite Bible quote." "You have a favorite Bible quote? I didn't know that." "Sure do. Yeah, though he walks through the valley of the shadow of pass away, he fears no evil, for he's the toughest and meanest SOB in the valley." "That's you." Jim couldn't help but laugh. "That's nonsense and you know it," he retorted. "Of course I know it and you know it. But Bob doesn't. I think I scared him enough to make him think twice before messing with you." "Well, I appreciate that, buddy." They both grinned and took another sip of their drinks. "You know what really annoys me?" Jim began. "That she doesn't believe me about not kissing some waitress." "Are you absolutely sure you didn't? Maybe just a peck on the cheek or something like that?" "No, he trailed off, and Tony could tell from his expression that he recalled something. "Aha, you did kiss her, didn't you?" "No, she kissed me," Jim responded. "Damn, I know what this is all about." The following day, Cindy was surprised to see Jim walking into her office at work. He immediately informed her that he was taking her to lunch. Before she could react, assuming it was his way of apologizing, she expressed gratitude but mentioned it was a bit early and asked if he could wait about 20 minutes. Jim reassured her, saying there was no need to wait. He had already spoken to her boss, explained the situation as a minor family emergency, and arranged for an extended lunch hour, which her boss agreed to. Jim urged her to come along, and Cindy, feeling apprehensive as she wasn't aware of any family emergency, followed him to the car. As she got in, Jim held the door for her. She questioned him about their destination and the nature of the family emergency. He didn't directly answer her question, but instructed her to call her friend and get the name of the restaurant where the alleged incident occurred. When she asked why, he simply told her to trust him and mentioned that he believed he had figured something out. Reluctantly, she called her friend and obtained the restaurant's name, Deary's on Holman Avenue. He responded with a smile, commenting on the coincidence that they were headed exactly there. Cindy remained silent but felt increasingly uneasy. She couldn't fathom why he would want to revisit the scene, except perhaps to confront her. Would he flirt with the waitress in front of her? She knew he wouldn't do that. She decided to wait and see what unfolded. The journey to the restaurant took nearly half an hour, during which Cindy agonized over numerous scenarios. She was almost in tears when they arrived. Jim placed his hand on her back and guided her inside. She knew trouble awaited her the moment they entered. "Damn," she muttered quietly. Jim found a booth and had Cindy sit first, then joined her. "Well, 'cause looks like you brought your better half today." Cindy blushed with embarrassment. "Hi, Marilyn," she greeted their waitress. "Hi, Cindy. How did you manage to get my cousin here for a real lunch, and with his wife no less?" "Every time I see him, he's in such a hurry he can barely eat," she joked. Jim wasn't about to let Cindy off easily. "Cindy seems to think you and I are having a passionate affair," he announced. Cindy waited for the punchline before responding. "What? No, Marilyn, that's not true." Cindy turned to her husband. "Jim, come on, I made a mistake. I apologize." She faced Marilyn again. "A friend told me last week that he kissed a waitress here. I didn't even know you worked here." "But we haven't," Jim interrupted. "You gave me a peck on the cheek when I arrived." "Oh gosh, Cindy, I didn't mean anything by it." Jim hadn't visited in a while, and it was just a friendly gesture. "Marilyn, don't worry about it," Cindy assured her. "I understand now. My friend misled me into thinking Jim had a thing with a waitress here. I'll be giving her a piece of my mind later." "I'd like to hear that," Jim challenged. Cindy looked at him and accepted the challenge. "All right," she said, retrieving her phone from her purse. Both Jim and Marilyn listened in on Cindy's side of the conversation. "Hi, Linda. Not too good. You know that waitress who you said was kissing Jim? You know who that was?" "Jim's cousin." "Yeah, his cousin." "No, I didn't appreciate you telling me. You made it sound like he was having an affair or something." "I don't care what you thought. I don't care if you think you see him screwing somebody in the middle of the floor. From now on, keep your gossip to yourself." "Yeah, you too." She almost hurt her finger disconnecting the call. Jim had a hunch it was Linda stirring up trouble. She frequently made derogatory remarks about her own husband. Cindy was worked up after the call. "I truly apologize to both of you. Jim was right. I should have known better." "You have a few more apologies to make when you get home tonight," Jim reminded her. "You're going to apologize to Tony, Barbara, and Jenny." "What about Bob?" "You can tell Bob to take a hike. You don't pursue a married woman no matter how much of a flirt she is." Marilyn, still standing nearby, asked, "Who's Bob?" "Her boyfriend," Jim joked. "Boyfriend?" she questioned. "Don't listen to him, Marilyn. I made a mistake and he's not done rubbing my nose in it yet." "It sounds like you two had quite a weekend," Marilyn observed. "Let's just say I'm pretty sure Cindy learned a lesson about trust," Jim replied. Cindy was more than a little embarrassed. Her face flushed as she opened the menu. "So Marilyn, what do you recommend?" Later after dinner, Cindy spent almost an hour on the phone apologizing to their friends, including Jenny. That night, they both lay undressed in bed. "Are you still mad?" she asked. "It depends." "On what?" "On whether you still think I would cheat on you." "I never really believed you'd cheat on me. I was worried you might give some woman the wrong impression. I just didn't want you leading her on." He considered her words and remembered how angry he felt watching her flirt with Bob. He'd never admit it, but he did understand her perspective a bit better now. Just as he was about to tell her he forgave her, he felt her hand slide down his body and start tickling his balls. "Come on, honey, you can't stay mad at me," she cooed. Maybe he decided he might not tell her he forgave her just yet. Her fingers gently wrapped around his manhood and slowly started stroking it up and down. Within seconds, he felt himself getting hard. Jim closed his eyes and let out a small sigh as her long red hair teased his skin. The loving touch of her lips sent shivers down his spine as she kissed the head of his fully engorged friend. "Oh, God," he groaned. She already knew she was forgiven, but Cindy wanted to take it to the limit. She swung one leg over his torso and guided him inside her. She closed her eyes as she leaned forward, resting her hands on his tight abs as she moved back and forth, driving him deeper and deeper. "Oh, babe, I'm not going to last long," he groaned. "Me either," she replied. Moments later, she threw her head back as her body stiffened. That was Jim's cue, and it was right on time as they both surrendered to an intense pleasure. A month later, Cindy and Barbara were having lunch together. "You and Jim seem to be getting along. Does he still flirt with waitresses?" "Not as much," Cindy replied. "He's still his friendly self, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I love that about him, but he does seem to pull back now and then." "That's all you really wanted, isn't it?" "Exactly." Barbara had to ask her next question, even though she thought she knew the answer. "So, have you heard from Bob lately?" "No, and I'm a little insulted, to tell you the truth. One punch and he just disappears. The wimp." They both laughed at that.
Story 2.
After 17 years, my wife cheated, pushed for open marriage. I divorced. Now she wants me back. I, 47 male, was married to Lissa, 42 female, for 17 years, though we lived as a couple for only about 7 years. A decade back, I caught Lissa cheating on me, and she confessed that she had fallen out of love and wanted an open marriage. We have 2 kids. The elder was a toddler, and the younger was still an infant when this happened. It was devastating for me. She said back-to-back pregnancies took a toll on her physical and mental well-being, so she wanted to freshen up. Unfortunately, her way of relaxing was to bring different men to bed. Divorce was complicated at that point with 2 little kids and my meager income. I decided to let her do what she wanted while I moved upstairs in our duplex house. We became co-parents of our children. It wasn't as hunky-dory as it sounds. We separated with a lot of bitterness and name-calling, mostly from me because she cheated. But eventually we got caught up in work and life, and I moved on and mellowed out. A few months back I met Kathy, 35 female at work. She's my junior and we vibed instantly. Bonding with her was the most natural thing to happen to me in a while. It wasn't a romantic relationship at first. We hit it off as understanding co-workers and happened to spend time together beyond work, still as friends. It was only last month that we made out, and I felt something special about her. Since then, she has been crashing at my place quite often, which is concerning because, technically, Lissa is still my wife. We're still married. Lissa has gotten weird these days. Weird as in she's hanging around me whenever Kathy and I are together. She commands authority like a wife. I had to remind her that we are separated and I get to do what I want, just as she's been doing for years. It's hard to describe what she's been doing, but let me try. One day, Kathy and I were having dinner in my kitchen. Lissa shows up and asks, "Can I join you guys?" It became a super awkward moment for both of us. Kathy and I looked at each other with astonished faces. Lissa sat down with her plate without even waiting for an answer. We had dinner sitting like strangers, smiling uninterestedly at Lissa's stupid and forced conversation. Our dinner was ruined, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt, thinking she was just trying to fit in. Then there was another instance where she acted bossy, trying to impose her rights as a wife. Kathy and I were upstairs watching a movie. Lissa barged in and asked me to come with her. I asked what the matter was and she said, "Your kids need you. The younger one has a science project to complete, and you need to help him." I was astonished because we had split the schoolwork for our kids. I get to assist the elder child, and she takes care of the younger one. I told her I had already done my part for our elder son, and this was her responsibility. She got furious and yelled, "Is this kid not yours? Instead of helping him, you're here lurking around like a dud." This led to a full-blown argument between Lissa and me. Kathy got awkward, excused herself, and left. After that incident, Kathy told me she wouldn't be hanging out at my place anymore, though we still meet at hers. But the thing is, why should I compromise my life when I've never raised a finger on hers? She has been leading her life however she wanted, bringing any Tom, Dick, and Harry to the house, and I chose to look the other way. But now that I've found someone to bond with, Lissa is acting like a witch and deliberately trying to break it. I confronted her the other day, and she said she wasn't bothered about my closeness with Kathy. She refused to acknowledge that she had been acting strangely and said I was overthinking. I told her if she continued to interfere in my life, I would consider getting a divorce. Tears welled up in her eyes. And she said she didn't mean to disturb us. She was just anxious about our son's unfinished project and was busy with work, so she asked for help. I told her that wasn't a call for help. It was no less than gaslighting. She called up Kathy and apologized, asking her to come over. Kathy accepted the apology but drew her boundaries, saying she preferred meeting me at her place. I'm in a fix now. I want to get rid of Lissa, but I'm afraid she'll ruin my budding relationship with Kathy. I'm thinking of getting a divorce now. The only reason I didn't go for divorce back then was because I didn't want my children to choose between their mom and dad. Now I'm wondering if I should prioritize myself over everything else, even my children, or wait a few more years for them to grow up. I'm not sure if Kathy would wait for me until then. I'm still angry with Lissa for opening the marriage and at myself for agreeing and not pushing back enough. The joys of modern romance, where not-so-ex-wives crash romantic dinners and school projects become battlegrounds for marital disputes. Apparently, your wife thinks an open marriage means inviting a rotating cast of characters into the bedroom while you're trying to salvage what's left of your dignity upstairs. The eternal conundrum of why we don't cut ties sooner with those who bring chaos into our lives. It's like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold, isn't it? Sometimes it's the fear of the unknown or the comfort of familiarity that keeps us stuck in dysfunctional situations. And let's not forget the hefty price tag that comes with divorce attorneys. They're not exactly handing out free consultations. But hey, hindsight is 20/20ths. Edit 1. Sorry for all the mumbo-jumbo and missing information, particularly around Lissa's cheating and our separation dynamics. People are saying it's difficult to give any advice without clarity, so here's everything. It's going to be long, you can skip this part if you aren't interested. in knowing the history. This was like 10 years ago, so I might miss some details here and there. 4 months after the birth of our younger son, Lissa started acting up. She didn't let me come close. She said she didn't feel ready for sex. Pregnancy and breastfeeding had made her averse to intimacy. I respected her decision, but she was also drifting apart emotionally. I suggested we seek couples therapy, but she shrugged it off, saying it was just her postpartum thing and that she would recover eventually. It was almost a year later when I lost patience and confronted her. I told her we needed to address the elephant in the room. She either goes to therapy with me or tells me the truth about what's wrong. She gaslighted the situation, saying I was being insensitive and spouting other nonsense, but I didn't let it slide this time and dug for the truth. I snooped on her phone but didn't find anything concrete. She had deleted most of the chats and emails. I don't remember exactly how I got the cue, but one day, she said she was going out shopping with her friends. I followed her car and found her cheating. She was sleeping with a young college student. I barged into his house. Okay, not barged, I knocked. A shirtless guy answered while Lissa was on the couch in her lingerie trying to cover herself. I held that guy by the neck and was almost about to punch him when Lissa intervened and pleaded with me to leave him alone. She cried that it wasn't his fault. He was just one of the guys she was hooking up with. It blew my mind. What the hell, one of the guys? She confessed to hooking up with a couple of guys. The guy standing in front of me had no idea what was happening or that she was married with kids. We came back home, and I did all the things any man in my situation would do. No, not hitting her. I'm a man of no violence. I called up her parents and revealed the truth in front of everyone. I insisted on a divorce. I even hired a lawyer and discussed the case, but as the situation progressed and the lawyer explained the reality, it shook me. There was no real gain for me except loss. With the children being so young, they would need their mother. At most, I could get joint custody, which would again be at Lissa's mercy. She could dictate the terms for me to meet them. Yeah, of course, I could knock on the courtroom's door if she didn't comply with the court order. But how many times would a normal man want to get into this law and order thing? We live in a no-fault state, so there was no moral policing for her. I still had to pay alimony, and child support was unavoidable. Basically, I would take care of all the responsibilities as a dad, but be left at Lissa's mercy to spend time with my children. Lissa, on the other hand, was also against the divorce. She suggested that instead of divorce, we open our marriage and come back to each other whenever we wanted. I knew I never wanted her back, but divorce was unaffordable at the time. The only viable option was to separate and live as housemates and co-parents. So we did that. Though she chooses to call it an open marriage or whatever crap she wants, I consider it to be a dead plant. We are separated. In the last 10 years, Lissa has had many partners, though she claims nothing serious with any of them. I believe she had at least 3 partners who were more than just physical. They came home, she went hiking and on vacations with them. It was not easy for me to see her getting intimate with other men, first her cheating and then her multiple partners. They were in our bedroom. We have a duplex house, and I took the guest bedroom upstairs. The stairs leading to it have a passage through the back door. We bought the house from an Asian couple who constructed it for their grown-up son to live upstairs with privacy. But the son moved out, and the couple sold the house to us because it was too big for them. The main entrance of the house opens into a living room with a huge closed kitchen and dining space, a master bedroom, and a storeroom which we made into our children's room. Upstairs, there's a guest room, the same size as the master bedroom. The remaining space is a huge library-type area for reading and hosting parties. That space leads to the top of the house, where there's a small terrace. Since I moved upstairs, I've been able to see most of what's happening downstairs. Sometimes I wished I could shut my eyes, but for my children's sake, I remained vigilant. At the start, I also jumped into a dating spree, but after a couple of months, it felt hollow and meaningless, so I stopped. Instead, I focused on more meaningful activities. I joined a badminton club and worked on my athletic body. I had been a sports enthusiast in college, so I went back to pursuing field games on weekends. I also joined a hiking club that organizes solo hikes every 2 months. You can't take your friends, spouse, or anyone you know, you go alone. And there's a bunch of other people who are also alone, so you hike with strangers. It was a lot of fun. I did that continuously for 2 years, and now I do it only twice a year. I've had hookups here and there in the last 10 years, but no emotional affairs and no long-term partners. I didn't feel that connection with anyone. But with Kathy, things are different. I feel happy around her. She's the woman I feel I can give love another chance with, but the devil of my life, Lissa, has come hunting me down. The current situation remains the same. Kathy refuses to come to my place, and I'm worried that she'll grow distant from me. I don't want to lose her. The situation is practically choosing between Kathy and my children, and I'm struggling to make a choice. The saga continues, doesn't it? Thanks for filling in the details. It sounds like you've been through quite the roller coaster ride with Lissa and navigating the aftermath of her. Choices hasn't been a walk in the park either. It's understandable why divorce seemed daunting given the complexities, especially with young children in the picture. Your decision to separate and co-parent was probably the most practical one at the time, despite Lissa's attempts to redefine it as an open marriage. And it seems like you've been doing your best to move forward, focusing on your own well-being and interests. Ultimately, it's important to prioritize your own happiness and well-being. But of course, that's easier said than done when kids are involved. No one wants to be miserable for the rest of their lives. You deserve to find happiness and fulfillment in your relationships, whatever form that may take. And I think at this point too, your children are aware of what their mother is doing. It must be as awkward and painful to watch for them as it is for you. Update 1. Hello all, thanks for all the suggestions and comments. I appreciate all of it, both good and bad. I sought therapy, which helped a lot in understanding my focal point and what I wanted at this stage in my life. As you all said, the children are entering their late teens, so it's just a matter of a few years before they walk out to lead their individual lives. It doesn't make sense to miss my chance of being happy with Kathy. I had a transparent discussion with Kathy. I told her about my feelings and that I wanted to be with her. If she felt likewise, I could work this out. She said she felt the same, but was reluctant because of my family dynamics. She just didn't feel comfortable being around my legal wife, but she was fine with the children being around. I told her I could work it out, I was going to move out, and the children could decide where they wanted to stay. They're mature enough to make that decision and could shuffle between their mom's and dad's homes. Kathy was in favor of this. My therapist suggested children's counseling where they could be made aware of our marital status in an age-appropriate manner. I told Lissa about the counseling and she flipped out. She said I was being selfish and insane for dragging our children into this mess, that I was messing up their lives by getting serious with Kathy, and that I should prioritize my family over my selfish desires. I lost my temper. Really, Lissa? Are you the one giving these preachings on family and moral BS? What happened to your ethics when you were getting intimate with different men while our children were still breastfeeding and rolling in their cribs? I asked her to back off and took the kids to the counselor. It was helpful. The children received it well and appreciated that we had stuck together for their sake. They also agreed that I had the right to be happy for the rest of my life. I told Lissa I would be filing for divorce. She acted shocked and started sobbing, saying, "I thought we decided never to get divorced and to be with each other." Throughout. Now that you've found this woman, you're leaving your family to be with her. I have also met so many men who wanted to marry me, but I never traded off my married life for them. I told her to stop trying to guilt-trip me. This wasn't helping. I told her to cut the crap and sign the papers. I'd be paying for the children's education until college, and she could keep the house and car as alimony. I'd be moving out. I told her I was choosing my happiness over money because now I could afford it. Back then, I couldn't. She cried and tried all means to talk me out of the divorce. She said I could move out and live with Kathy while staying married to her. I said I loved Kathy and didn't want her to be called my mistress. I know no one would actually call her that, but Lissa would. She'd go to any length to humiliate others. The papers should arrive any day now. I'm moving in with Kathy next month. I'm waiting for my children's annual exams to finish, then I'll take them on a trip and move out. I will be relieved once all this is settled. Update 2. I tell you, this woman is a real witch. As I mentioned in my last update, I was on vacation with my kids. Lissa used the opportunity to pull off her evil plan. She sobbed her way to Kathy and asked her to back off, saying that Kathy was tearing apart her family and that her children would suffer because of her. Lissa tried to guilt-trip Kathy, but when Kathy didn't budge, Lissa said I wasn't serious about her and that Kathy was just a fling for me. Lissa is shrewd and cruel. She knew very well how to play her cards. She knew I was in a low-network zone with the kids, so Kathy wouldn't contact me, and she didn't. Had Kathy been any other woman, she would have gone crazy hearing Lissa call her a fling. But Kathy remained composed and waited for my return. She had the hotel number where I was staying but didn't disturb me. That's what I love about her. She's a secure woman, even with my complex situation. When I returned home and learned about Lissa's malicious move, I stormed to her door and gave her the yelling of her life. I should have done this earlier to get the crap out of her head. Her entitled behavior has crossed all limits, and no one is going to tolerate it anymore. I've moved out of the house. My children have also decided to stay with me, but we don't have a spare room for them yet, so I'm looking for a bigger house to accommodate them. Until then, they're at their mom's. Lissa threw all kinds of tantrums when I was moving out, from guilt-tripping to yelling, from gaslighting to sobbing and pleading, asking for another chance for our relationship. I told her our relationship was over 10 years ago. We were just housemates and co-parents. The reality is, I've moved on from loving her. She's nothing to me. I love Kathy and want to spend the rest of my life with her. When the divorce papers reached Lissa, she tore them up. My lawyer had to. Sent her a notice threatening to sue her for damaging a legal document. Only then did she mellow down and agree to sign it. The divorce proceedings are ongoing. I haven't checked on my soon-to-be ex since then. I went to pick up my children twice but didn't enter the house. Update 3. So glad to announce that my soon-to-be ex is now my official ex-wife. The highlight of this update is that the divorce is settled, and my children have moved in with me. They'll visit their mom every 2 weeks or whenever they want. The last month has been hectic, renting a house and moving stuff. We didn't tell Lissa about the children moving in with me until I rented a new house. The children and I all knew she would cause chaos, so we avoided telling her for as long as possible. The kids even said they'd keep their bags packed and sneak out with me when Lissa wasn't around. But I decided to go the legal way, didn't want to get into more trouble with that woman. As per our divorce clause, we have to give each other 3 days' notice if we want to take the children for more than 2 days. So I went home and told her the children wanted to move in with me, and I'd be picking them up in 3 days. As expected, she freaked out. Good for her that she didn't go violent, breaking things and all. It would have played better for us. But no, she chose the emotional route. She hugged the kids, cried, apologized for everything, and asked them not to abandon her. She did her best to manipulate them emotionally into staying with her, and she even succeeded with the younger one. He said he wanted to stay with Mama. Kathy had warned me that situations like this could arise, and that I should be prepared for a last-minute backout. When my son called, I said, "Cool, Dad loves you no matter what." But the elder son stuck to his decision to move out. I said, "Sure, I'll pick you up." I don't know what happened in the meantime, but when I went to pick them up, both boys were ready with their stuff. I hugged them both and took them home. I didn't ask what happened. It's already so traumatic for them. I don't want to push them further. Kathy and I are trying to make them comfortable in our house. We're involving them in setting up their room, letting them design everything to their taste. When the children were leaving the house, I was expecting Lissa to make a last attempt, but she had given up by then. She just sat there crying and sobbing. She hugged the boys tightly, told them how sorry she was about her behavior, and said she loved them and that they were free to come back to Mama's whenever they wanted. She asked me if I had a minute for a coffee. Her request sounded naive and genuine, so I agreed. Her tone was remorseful, and she apologized. This time, it didn't sound fake. She said, "I was delusional all this while, thinking you would never leave me. When Kathy came into your life, I didn't consider her a threat. I thought she was just one of those flings that would fizzle out in a month. I guess I took you for granted because of the security you provided to me and the children, despite everything I did to you. I didn't realize I was mean and narcissistic, and by the time I did, it was too late, I guess." I just smiled and suppressed my emotions from flowing out. I stood up to leave. She came forward to hug me, and I hugged her back. That was our first hug in 10 years. I can't explain how I felt about it, nor can I express how I feel now after that last talk with her. I'm neither happy nor sad, just numb. That's what it is. The last 6 to 7 months have been quite life-changing for me. I guess it will take time to process everything, but thank you all for your support. You've been the best. I might update the thread if anything progresses from here. Lissa's sudden realization of her actions and her attempts at apology might seem like a step toward redemption, but it's crucial to recognize that her epiphany comes far too late in the game. After years of manipulation, emotional turmoil, and attempts to undermine your happiness. Her apologies ring hollow in the face of the damage she's caused. It's understandable that you feel numb and conflicted after your last interaction with her, but remember, you've taken the necessary steps to move forward and create a brighter future for yourself and your children. Thank you for sharing your journey with us, and I wish you all the best as you continue to navigate this new chapter in your life, Opa. Remember, you deserve happiness and fulfillment, and you've taken the courageous steps to pursue it. What do you all make of this?
Story 3.
We got married, and just 4 days later, we began a new part of our lives on the east coast of the USA. I worked as an engineer, and she got a job as a chemist. Looking back, the first 4 years of our marriage were pretty happy, if not perfect. Since we didn't have family or friends nearby, we spent most of our time together, creating some unforgettable memories. Trouble started when we decided to buy a townhouse, and I suggested starting a family, thinking it was the next step in our relationship. However, when I brought it up, things took a bad turn. We argued a lot, and my ex admitted she didn't have a problem with having kids, but she didn't want them with me. That hurt. She said having a child with me would tie her down completely, and she wasn't sure about spending her life with me. As we talked more, things got worse until my ex-wife told me she was no longer attracted to me. I asked if there was someone else, and to my dismay, she confessed to being strongly attracted to her boss. Turns out, they had secretly liked each other for a while, and their relationship turned physical during work trips. When I returned from my trip, something was off with my wife. She seemed sorry and suggested we sell our house and move to a smaller town for a fresh start. I was confused, since we just went through a rough patch, and now she wanted to relocate with me? It didn't make sense. Then, she started talking about her mother cheating on her first husband during a trip to Mexico. She hinted at something, but I couldn't figure it out. I should have been alarmed when she admitted being attracted to her boss, especially since they traveled together for work. It was almost a confession of cheating on their recent trip, but I was young and naive, and the situation didn't register. Soon, things went out of control. She worked late, went away on weekends to the mountains, where I later found out her boss had a cabin, and even took a alone 1-week vacation to clear her mind. This was before cell phones, so I couldn't reach her. I remember losing my mind not hearing from my wife for a week, with no idea where she was. My thoughts raced, considering every scenario except the obvious one. She was with her lover on a week-long vacation. As time went on, I stayed by her side, doing my best to help. I covered the costs for her counseling, drove her to appointments, and waited in the car. I hoped therapy would make her see that she was treating me unfairly. However, during one session, the therapist suggested divorce might be the best option, and surprisingly, my wife seemed to agree. Despite this setback, I still held on to hope that we could figure things out and she'd become the loving partner she used to be. Her behavior became unpredictable, showing she was dealing with inner struggles. One moment she'd express love, and the next, she couldn't stand being near me. I noticed she constantly tried to start fights, giving various reasons for her unhappiness. She'd keep pushing until I got upset, then escalate the argument until I had to leave the house for some peace. This was her chance to call her lover, as shown by the phone records. When she asked for a divorce, it felt like my world fell apart. While our marriage had its challenges, divorce had never crossed my mind. You have to understand, I come from a deeply Catholic background, specifically Hispanic, and divorce was a taboo subject in my upbringing. During that time, I had to attend a 2-week training in another state. When I returned, she was gone, and so were half of our furniture and savings. I was left clueless about her whereabouts. With no internet or online support groups available, I had no one to turn to. Feeling alone and abandoned, I sank into a dark hole of depression. The drama and stress had taken a toll on me for the past 18 months, and I had let myself go. I gained weight and didn't care about my physical or mental well-being. Looking back, I appeared as terrible as I felt. My ex disappeared without a trace, leaving me with no way to contact her, no return address, and no support from mutual friends she had deceived. In a matter of days, I was completely isolated. Somehow I forced myself out of bed each morning and went to work, earning just enough to stay afloat. One morning, almost a year after my ex left me alone and broke, I woke up to see shadows moving slowly on the empty walls of my home. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, but the real horror was my life. I realized that if I didn't pull myself out of this despair soon, I would become nothing more than a shadow in the wall of an empty room. Back then, I felt like I was in a living nightmare. To give you an idea, 5 years before my ex left me, I had to undergo open-heart surgery. Surgeons cut my chest open, spread my ribs, and wired my chest back together with 11 titanium wires. It took me 18 months to recover from that ordeal, but I would have rather gone through it all again than relive the experience of being betrayed and abandoned by my spouse. It was a really tough time, but somehow I found the strength to pull myself out of that deep well of despair and start rebuilding my life. I was determined to completely change who I was from the inside out. Despite facing many challenges, I still had a good job and a roof over my head. So I began focusing on my health and well-being. I started exercising regularly and lost an impressive 50 pounds. I got rid of my old clothes and got some stylish new ones. I even switched from glasses to contact lenses. On top of all that, I started running and trained for a marathon, but that's not all. I also got into rock climbing and joined a volleyball team. Gradually, I began living a life I could be proud of. Even though I may not be the most handsome guy, I started radiating an aura of confidence that people noticed. Women found me attractive, and soon enough, I was back in the dating scene. Looking back, I realized that my wife's betrayal turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. It allowed me to discover my true self and become the man I was meant to be. After a couple of years living my new life, I found myself looking for a new companion. Fate had it that I found her in a friend from work, someone who had seen my decline and subsequent rise from the ashes. To say she was stunning would be an understatement. Even the guards in my building, who I had become good friends with, couldn't believe I was dating the babe of the building. After falling in love and getting married, my wife decided to quit her job and focus on raising our 4 children. With only one income on the expensive East Coast of the USA, luxury was out of the question. But my wife proved to be an excellent home manager and an even better mother. She was a force to be reckoned with, running triathlons and learning auto maintenance, woodworking, and carpentry while managing our family of 6. There was no household project she wouldn't tackle. Currently, we're building a camper van to explore the USA when I retire in December. And to top it all off, we're eagerly awaiting the arrival of our first grandchild this winter. My wife taught me the real meaning of a strong, independent woman, and my life has been better for it. We never know what the future will bring, so we just have to stay positive and trust that good people are out there looking for us too. Betrayal doesn't have to define us, especially if there's no chance for reconciliation. Even if a relationship doesn't work out, it doesn't mean the end of the road. You might be curious about what happened to the ex. Well, a few years after she left, I heard through the grapevine that her boss divorced his wife, and soon after, they became a couple and eventually got married. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Fast forward to around 15 years ago, out of nowhere, she managed to track down my number and give me a call. She wanted to let me know that a mutual friend had passed away. We chatted for a bit, and I couldn't help but ask how she was doing. Her response was a bit cryptic, something like, living with the consequences of her past mistakes. I replied with a nonchalant, "It's all water under the bridge," and promptly hung up. To be honest, I'm grateful to my ex-wife for bringing me and my current wife together. It's strange how life works sometimes, isn't it? One decision can change everything. And here's another thing. My unsuccessful marriage steered me toward a new path in life. Over the past 15 years, I've been leading a ministry at my parish, assisting those going through divorces and separations. As a Catholic permanent deacon, I've worked with numerous individuals, guiding them to find peace and hope for the future. You could say that my ex-wife's unwillingness to reconcile with me has directed me toward a more significant purpose. Now let's address a few questions you might have while hearing my story. Did she ever apologize? No, she never said sorry. She didn't even bid farewell. It was as if the years we spent together, from being best friends in college to dating and getting married, meant nothing to her. Did you ever talk to her? We co-owned a townhouse, and since she contributed to the mortgage, we had to communicate. She developed an odd system of phone calls through friends for me to reach her, and then she would call me back only if she thought communication was necessary. We only spoke a few times. Have you ever laid eyes on her again? I saw her 3 times after she left me, the last time being the day our divorce was finalized. a couple of years after her betrayal. She looked disheveled, dressed like a hippie, without makeup. Meanwhile, I had lost 50 pounds and was hitting the gym hard. Due to my weight loss, all my clothes were tailored, making me look sharp in my suit and tie. The last glance she gave me when the judge asked if I had any objections to the divorce agreement is forever etched in my mind. It was pure hatred. Her narcissistic mind couldn't handle the fact that I had thrived without her negative influence in my life. Second story. Recently, I've been suspecting my wife's faithfulness, but it's tricky without solid proof to support my gut feeling. I'm hesitant to confront her or bring up the topic, fearing unnecessary drama or giving her a chance to cover her tracks if she's guilty. It's a tough decision, and I'm uncertain about my next move. In the recent months, something seems off with my wife. Small things don't add up. About 4 months ago, she started hitting the gym and paying more attention to her appearance. She's always been beautiful, but she never cared much for makeup or hairstyling. Now she's always dressed up. Another concern is how protective she is of her phone. While it's normal for us to go through each other's phones, hers is always with her. If I need to use it for something innocent, like taking a picture, she tells me to use my own phone. Additionally, she's been working late and traveling more for her job. Something just doesn't feel right. Over the past 4 months, my wife hasn't shown interest in being close with me. Quick, meaningless kisses are all I get. I've tried initiating physical contact, but she's turned me down, and when she does give in, she just lies there, unresponsive. It leaves me feeling worse than a direct rejection. When I brought up the lack of closeness before, she blamed it on tiredness from being a mom, work, and lifting weights. She promised to try harder and even kissed me later that night, but nothing has changed since then. I've been trying to figure out what's going on with my wife lately. Could it be a midlife crisis? Or maybe something else? It's hard to pinpoint. But there's a guy at her workplace that caught my attention. She used to talk about him all the time, but suddenly stopped a few months back. Despite this, I know they still work closely together. Apparently, he's married with kids and has been confiding in my wife about his own marital issues. I've briefly met him a few times, but he didn't seem interested in getting to know me. It's got me thinking that he could be trouble. I hate to admit it, but I've been comparing myself to this guy at my wife's work. He's not as good looking as me, and definitely not in the same physical shape. Not to brag, but it's true. I'm big and strong, while he's average and a little overweight. But he dresses sharply, is outgoing, and enjoys a drink, something my wife has mentioned a few times that she wishes I would do more often. He has a master's degree, while I only graduated from high school. And to top it off, he makes more money than I do. As a trainer for fighters, I earn a modest income, but my passion for the job is invaluable. On the flip side, there's this guy who's wealthy and enjoys flaunting his riches. I don't usually compare myself to others, but in this situation, the contrasts between us are glaring. What's been bothering me is my wife's recent business trip to a tropical resort. Initially, I thought many coworkers would be there, but it turns out it was just her, the flashy guy, and the CEO. The CEO isn't a concern due to age, but the other guy is a different story. My gut tells me something happened between them during that week, and not knowing for sure is driving me crazy. My inner detective senses something is off in my marriage, but I'm cautious not to jump to conclusions and worsen things by confronting her. While our marriage has had its challenges, overall, it's been decent. Nothing major has occurred to make me question her loyalty. However, my wife and I have different personalities. I'm not the most social person, and I don't make a lot of money, which frustrates her. She believes I should be pursuing a more lucrative career, but my passion lies in fighting and training fighters, something I've known my whole life. I could consider becoming a personal trainer, but these paths don't lead to significant earnings. Apart from this, she seems content in our marriage. However, I can't shake the feeling that something is off, especially in her behavior towards me and this flashy guy at work. A friend suggested I play the spy and gather evidence to confirm my suspicions, but I'm uncomfortable violating my wife's privacy. If she is cheating, forgiveness might be challenging, but I hope my hunch is wrong. Lately, thoughts of infidelity have been creeping into my mind, and I can't shake them. The scariest part is, We have 2 kids, and the idea of losing them terrifies me. I'm heavily invested in their lives, and the thought of only seeing them half the time breaks my heart. Any suggestions on how to approach this situation would be appreciated. Update. I got the login details for our cell phone account. My wife uses her phone a lot for work, and initially, everything seemed normal when I checked it. However, as I sorted through the numbers and times, I noticed a large number of texts sent to a single number, often late at night, a few hours after we went to bed. I'm determined to find out who owns this number and plan to somehow access my wife's phone to see whose name is saved under it. When I discovered this, my emotions got the best of me, and I started feeling angry. I tried convincing myself it was a mistake or some friend of hers. But last night, when I tried to get close to her, she turned me down again. She apologized, citing tiredness and a headache. I expressed my feeling that we weren't connecting well, and she apologized, promising to do better. However, she had made similar promises before without following through. Not wanting to push further, I just said goodnight and went to bed. This morning, she casually mentioned thinking about a trip to Vegas with some college girlfriends. Despite not being into gambling, it struck me as odd. I asked about her companions, and she named a few girls I had never met. It might all be a coincidence, but I can't shake this feeling that something is off. Update. Recapping, I've had serious suspicions about my wife having an affair. So, I decided to snoop around and found something interesting. Detailed cell phone records revealed countless late-night texts to one specific number, hundreds of them. Taking a chance, I called the number from a payphone, and it turned out to be one of her co-workers, the same one I suspected. I had a sneaky feeling this guy might be trouble. But wait, it gets worse. I got her phone while she was in the shower, and guess what? The entire text conversation with this guy had been deleted. To make matters more incriminating, the number I called earlier was saved in her phone under a female name. Yes, she was trying to be sneaky about it. Now, my mind is filled with worries about all those out-of-town trips she took with this guy. Something is definitely not right here, and I'm starting to fear the worst. After discovering evidence of my wife's potential infidelity, I had to leave the house to clear my head. Despite my best efforts, I'm not sure what to do next. If I confront her now, she may come up with some excuse or lie. Should I wait and gather more evidence before approaching her, or should I come clean immediately? I am seething with anger, and the thought of the other guy makes me want to lash out. But I know that won't solve anything. I fear that if I do confront her, she may only admit to minor flirtations, leaving me without enough proof of the bigger picture. I could really use some advice on how to proceed. I laid in wait like a lion stalking its prey with a sneaky plan, pretending to be asleep, biding my time. After everyone was in bed and the house was silent, I kept one eye open, waiting for her to make a move. And sure enough, the clock struck 12, and my wife got out of bed and slinked into another room, quietly closing the door behind her. I waited a few minutes before getting up and slowly walking towards her. I caught her red-handed mid-text and stood over her before she could react. Her eyes widened in shock as she tried to hide her phone, but it was too late. I demanded to know who she was texting at this ungodly hour. She stammered and stuttered, trying to come up with a plausible excuse, but I wasn't buying it. She said it was just a girlfriend, but I knew there was more to it than that. I had her cornered, and she knew it. I couldn't believe what I had just done. My plan was risky, but it worked. I started kissing her and asked if she wanted to fool around, just as I expected. She said she couldn't. I laughed and playfully teased her, saying that she must be more into the girlfriend that she was texting than me. Then, I started to tickle her, and we playfully wrestled. I managed to get the phone from her, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She tried to get it back, but I held it in the air, like I was playing keep-away. I laughed and acted like I was having fun the entire time, telling her that I was going to call this girlfriend and ask if she was into my wife. As my wife pleaded with me not to call her friend, a sense of satisfaction overcame me. I walked away, pretending to end the conversation, while secretly checking the text messages on her phone. One message caught my eye, saying, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." My heart raced as I hit the call button, waiting for a response. A man's voice came through the speaker, and I hung up, unsure of what to say. Turning to my wife, I began reading the messages aloud. I could see fear in her eyes as I asked if the recipient was a guy or her friend. She stayed silent. Continuing, I demanded an explanation for the late-night text to this guy. She stuttered, claiming she didn't know. I pressed on, asking if there was anything she needed to tell me. She couldn't speak, and that's when I dropped the bomb. Calmly, I said, "I know everything. I know when you wake up to text him, and I know who he is." Tears streamed down her face as she apologized, but I remained composed. I issued a stern warning about the crucial moments ahead, urging her to come clean. My wife finally confessed to flirting with her coworker, dealing with marital troubles, and it escalated beyond casual chit-chat. She insisted they never did anything physical, but I wondered if she was telling the whole truth. I gave her an ultimatum to confess everything or leave. She cried and apologized, admitting to flirting with her coworker, who also faced marital issues, but I doubted she was telling me the whole truth. I told her we'd discuss things later, and she needed to pack a bag and leave for her mom's house. As she left, she asked if I would leave her. I didn't give her a direct answer and said we would talk later. However, she kept blowing up my phone, so I turned it off to get some space. Deciding to seek a marriage counselor, I pretended to want reconciliation to avoid suspicion. Last night's confrontation wasn't impulsive. I had a plan. While playfully wrestling and tickling her, I recorded the entire thing on my phone, just in case she falsely accused me of something later. I checked with a friend to ensure it was legal in our state, and he confirmed it was. Despite thinking she wouldn't do that, I can't be too careful given the circumstances. I'm a big guy, 6'4" and 240 pounds of muscle. I used to be a fighter, now training fighters. If there's any false accusation, I know the odds are against me. I could get arrested and lose everything, including my kids. That's why I plan to keep recording everything as an insurance policy. My world has shattered into a million pieces. My family, my everything, has been destroyed. I'll miss out on 50% of my children's childhood. Despite sensing something was wrong, the reality blindsided me. The worst part? This is just the beginning of the pain. I want to confront the other guy, but I know I need to hold back. I heard through the grapevine that he found me terrifying when he first laid eyes on me, so I'd like to give him a good scare. And to top it all off, in one of the texts my wife and he shared, he referred to me as the animal, after she made a jab at my intelligence. I may not have a college degree or make much money, but I'm not stupid. I love learning and reading books on all sorts of topics. But in this moment, I'm feeling anything but smart. For now, I'm just trying to make sense of this devastation. Update. My friend, who's an attorney, connected me with a family law specialist. The positive part is this attorney understands what it's like to be cheated on, having been in my shoes. My friend mentioned he's eager to help and won't charge me excessively. It's a good development amid the chaos. On the other hand, my wife came clean about having an affair. She started with the excuse of just flirting, but I didn't buy it. Eventually, she confessed it turned physical, lasting longer than I thought. She shared all the steamy details, and I'm honestly unsure how to feel about it. My head is spinning and I can't focus. The emotional roller coaster is too much. I had a serious talk with my wife, suggesting it's best for her to stay with her mom for now. Being around her became unbearable. I needed space, and so did our kids. They deserved normalcy, and I decided to take care of them. My attorney mentioned that staying in the house is a significant advantage in this situation. Although I decided our marriage was over, I kept it to myself. She'll find out when the papers are served. My mind is a mess, constantly replaying thoughts of my wife with this guy. Trying to stay focused on coaching fighters in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu helps a bit, but my mind often wanders. Physical exertion helps clear my head a little, but it's not a permanent fix. My kids have been my saving grace, and I focus all my attention and affection on them. Beyond BJJ and my children, I love learning and reading about new topics. Unfortunately, I can't concentrate on a paragraph without losing my train of thought. The text calling me a stupid animal make me wonder what else was said. It feels like I'm trapped in a nightmare, and the happy-go-lucky me feels like a distant memory. As news of my situation spread, many people offered support, which is comforting. Surprisingly, some friends' wives offered to set me up with some beautiful women they know, some of whom seem interested. But as tempting as it may be, I have no intention of dating until this is all behind me, And even then, it might take a while. Right now, my focus is solely on my kids, ensuring they have stability during this tough time. My heart is shattered, and my kids bear the brunt of the fallout. Being a single dad wasn't something I ever envisioned, but here I am. Meanwhile, my wife seems to be spiraling into a dark abyss. The guy she cheated on me with apparently bailed on her, and she's been drowning her sorrows in drinks, going out with men she meets online. She's been reaching out to me, sobbing and begging me to take her back, saying she wants her old life back. It's tempting, but I know I can't let her back into my life. It seems she's turned her anger towards me once she learned how much she'll have to pay in monthly support. At least that means I can get some peace from her constant calls. My kids don't get it. I feel miserable every second they're not with me. I'm lonely all the time, spending most of my time at home. The girl at the coffee shop noticed I looked sad and asked if everything was okay. I guess I'm not hiding it well. People want to set me up, but I feel branded as the guy whose wife cheated, so I'm not interested. It's been so long. I have no idea how to date. The success of a few fighters on a public stage has been the only spark I've felt in a long time. I'm not sure what I'll do next, and I need to snap out of it at some point, but I lack the motivation. I decided to take matters into my own hands and expose the other guy. With proof of the affair, I contacted his wife and presented the evidence. I couldn't sit back and let him get away with it. Initially, she didn't believe me, but later I heard there were significant problems in their marriage. They might still be together, but their relationship is hanging by a thread. I'm struggling with intense feelings of anger and frustration over the situation. Life is full of surprises. I never thought I'd be in this situation, but here I am. On a positive note, there's a girl I met through friends, and I can't stop thinking about her. She's gorgeous, but she's also about 14 years younger than me. The age gap seems significant, and my confidence is low, but I can't stop thinking about her. I haven't asked her out yet. The last 6 months have been an emotional roller coaster. I never expected such profound sadness. My usual happy-go-lucky personality has been replaced by a dark and melancholic one. After the terrible experience, I took some time for myself. During that time, the beautiful younger woman I was interested in got a long-term job assignment in Europe. Even though she was miles away, we kept in touch through technology. When her assignment was over, she returned, and we've been together ever since. She adores me and my kids and has a heart of gold. Before we met, I heard about this incredible woman who looked like Wonder Woman and was the kindest person you could ever imagine. I thought it was too good to be true, but she's everything and more. I believe we're ready to take the next steps in our relationship soon. My ex-wife's life has taken a turn for the worse since our divorce. She started drinking heavily, hooking up with random guys online, and took on more work, which took a toll on her. The last time I saw her, she looked like she had aged 15 years, as if her life force had been drained from her. Her best friend told me she's become a miserable person to be around. I still can't understand how someone who seemed to have everything under control could spiral into such a dark place. Her friend also confided in me that my ex-wife never expected me to leave her after the affair. I believe she thought she had control over me because of her high income. It's sad to see the consequences of her actions, but I hope she finds peace for the sake of our kids. Life is pretty good now, despite ongoing pandemic struggles. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't drag out my first marriage. Ending it was a tough call, but it was the right one. After that, it was just one step in front of the other. Every day I pushed a little further, even though it felt like I was wading through quicksand. I now know that when you're in that situation, you have to think long term. You might feel like the world is ending, but there's always hope. The key is to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it gets. Trust me, it gets pretty damn hard. But every day, try to do something that adds to your skill set. Not just motivational self-help stuff, but real skills. For me, I started making short films of my fighters and got into videography and editing. It's been a fun hobby, and I've learned a lot. I also read more books than ever before, trying to learn about all sorts of topics. Small things like these add up over time. You just have to keep at it and be patient with yourself.
Story 4.
The countryside around Richmond was known for its calm, with wide, open fields stretching endlessly and a slow, steady way of life. Palmer's farm sat just off the main road, marked by its old buildings, untouched by the rapid changes elsewhere. Palmer, An elderly farmer who thrived on routine rarely faced more than the occasional stray animal or broken fence. But that day was different. Something had shattered the familiar peace, leaving an uneasy silence behind. A few days earlier, chatter at the town diner was the usual. Talk of a new mayoral candidate, rising feed costs, or a neighbor's missing dog. But whispers about Palmer's place shifted the mood. When Palmer heard the sharp crack of a loud noise slicing through the calm afternoon, years of protecting his land spurred him into action. His worn boots thudded on the dry ground as he hurried to the old barn. Bridget skimmed through the investigator's report for any clues. The case seemed straightforward. Palmer, a farmer near the highway by Powhatan, Virginia, reported hearing what sounded like pop from his barn. Fearing a hunter had ignored his no-hunting signs, he went to check and found a woman's lifeless body surrounded by deep red stains. He called emergency immediately. Police and medics arrived to find she'd passed. Her car was parked outside with her purse left inside containing ID that named her as Kelly Russell, wife of Barry Russell, a Richmond financial advisor. Detectives found no signs of a struggle or theft. Her wallet, holding $125, was untouched. No tool was found at the scene, but a 9mm shell casing lay on the barn floor. The medical examiner confirmed she was ended at close range by a Colt, with the time of passing around 3 p.m. Bridget's eyes narrowed when she saw a photo of the scene. Kelly was gone instantly, and while Bridget expected to see pain or fear on her face, there was only profound shock. Bridget's heartbeat quickened. This could be it, she thought. After brief condolences, the detective sat in Barry Russell's home office to question him. "Mr. Russell, did your wife have any enemies?" the older detective asked. "No," Barry said, surprised. "Everyone loved Kelly. No one ever said a bad word about her." The detective made a note. "How about between you two? Any disagreements or issues?" "No," Barry said, then paused. "Well, we had the usual bumps. Expenses, priorities, that kind of thing." The younger detective leaned forward. "So, money disagreements?" "We didn't argue," Barry said quickly. "We had minor disagreements, nothing serious." He glanced at the detective's wedding ring. "You're married, right? Haven't you ever disagreed on spending?" The older detective chuckled as the younger one flushed. "Let's talk about that day. Why was she at the Palmer barn?" "I wish I knew," Barry said. "She called and asked me to meet her there at 2 o'clock, saying she had something big to show me but couldn't explain over the phone. I wasn't thrilled about it, especially with an appointment at 4 o'clock, but I agreed." "But you didn't go," the younger detective noted. "No, I got a flat tire on the way. It took a long time to change it, and I got dirty. By the time I finished, I barely made it home to clean up before my client arrived at 4 o'clock. "Why not call AAA?" the older detective asked. "I'm not a member," Barry said. The detective nodded. "And when you called your wife to say you couldn't make it?" Barry lowered his head. "I didn't call her. I rushed out without my phone. By the time I got home, showered, and changed, my client had arrived." "That was at 4 p.m.? the older detective confirmed. "Yes, right on time," Barry said. "And between 2 o'clock and 4 p.m., did anyone see you?" the detective asked. Barry paused. "Not that I know of," the younger detective continued. "You got home around 3:30? Barry nodded. "And then showered, changed into a clean suit, and met your client?" the detective asked. "Exactly," Barry confirmed. "And what did you do after the client left?" "I took my dirty suit to the dry cleaners," Barry said. "Convenient," the detective remarked. "Convenient? What do you mean?" Barry asked, confused. The detective leaned in. "Convenient that you needed a shower right away and took your suit to the cleaners." Barry looked puzzled. "I don't get it." "That would remove any gunpowder or evidence from a shooting," the detective said. Barry's face hardened. "Hold on. I had nothing to do with my wife's death. I told you. I never even got to Palmer's farm. I can't believe you suspect me." The detectives exchanged looks. "Are you a suspect, Mr. Russell? Is there something you want to share about your wife's death?" the older detective asked. Barry's frustration grew. "If I'm a suspect, I need a lawyer. I'm done answering questions without one," he said firmly. The detective stood. "That's your right, but we'll be back, Mr. Russell." Bridget called. "Hey, Jill, it's your little sister." "Hey, BG," Jill replied. "Haven't heard from you in days." "Sorry, I've been deep into my project. I think I found something big." Bridget shared details of the Russell case, mentioning the investigative report and medical examiner's photo. "Wait, BG, how did you get the IOR and ME report? Those are confidential." Bridget chuckled. "I might have let an officer think I still write for the Criminals Channel and hinted he'd make a good interview subject." "Cops love a bit of publicity." Jill laughed. "You'd never get that from me." They joked a bit before Jill asked, So what's next for your big nonfiction debut? Heading to Richmond to talk to the husband, Bridget said. How do you plan to do that? Jill asked, concerned. I already set an appointment with him. Jill's tone turned serious. Be careful. Husbands are usually suspects when a wife is liquidated. He could be dangerous. I know, Jill. I'll be cautious. Just don't take it lightly. If anything happened to you, I'd be devastated. I promise, Jill, I'll keep you updated. Don't make me come to Richmond and bail you out, Jill joked. The next morning, Barry was still upset about the detective's visit, but composed himself for a meeting with a potential client. Business had been slow since the recession, so he was eager for any opportunity. When the doorbell rang, Barry welcomed Bridget Callahan and led her to his office. She appeared around 30 with short brown hair and a slim figure in a business suit, reminding him of Kelly. Once seated, Barry poured coffee, hoping to make her comfortable. So, Miss Callahan, tell me about your financial goals, he said. Bridget set down her cup. First, I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Russell. I can't imagine how difficult it's been. Thank you. That's kind of you, Barry replied. She continued. Second, I must apologize. I'm not here for financial advice. I'm here with a proposition. Barry's expression shifted. You're a salesperson? He asked, annoyed. No, Bridget said calmly. I'm a writer for the Criminals Channel with years of experience in criminal justice. I want to write a book about your wife's death and the investigation. I'm here to ask for your full cooperation. Barry was stunned. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, you're in serious trouble, Bridget replied firmly. Barry stood. If that's a threat, it won't work. I think it's time for you to leave. Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain, Bridget said. If you still want me to go after that, I'll leave. Barry sighed and sat down. 5 minutes. Bridget pulled out her tablet. You've already spoken to the police. It must have been unsettling. How do you know? Barry asked. I've covered many investigations, and they often suspect the husband, Bridget said. Plus, it's in today's Richmond Times-Dispatch. What article? Barry asked. Bridget handed him the tablet, showing a story titled, Police Question Husband in Russell Slaying, mentioning Barry as a person of interest. Barry's face fell. This makes it sound like an arrest is inevitable. Bridget nodded. Barry sank into his chair. I thought we were innocent until proven guilty. In court, yes. But public opinion is different, Bridget said. Just then, Barry's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Excuse me, I need to take this. Hello, Tom. What can I do for you? Barry listened, frowning. Tom, you've been with me for years. Are you unhappy with your results? Another pause. No, that's not true. I had nothing to do with Kelly's death. I loved her. He sighed. All right, I understand. Maybe we can work together once this clears up. Barry hung up and returned to his seat. I can't believe this. One of my oldest clients just pulled his business because his wife's friends think I'm guilty. Bridget reached out sympathetically. I'm so sorry, Barry. This is exactly what I meant. Without an arrest, people start making assumptions, and those often fall on you. Barry buried his face in his hands. I can't believe people who've known me for years could think I'm capable of murder. It's awful, Barry. But when there's no clear evidence, people fill in the blanks. They assume there's something hidden. Bridget sighed. Even if you're proven innocent, some won't hear or believe it. Rumors are more gripping than facts, and doubts often linger long after a case is closed. Good news won't spread like the bad. I can't believe this is real. What am I supposed to do? Change my name and move away? Barry said, defeated. There's another option, and that's why I'm here, Bridget said. Let me tell your story. Share your thoughts and experiences with me so people see the truth. How is that different from the stories on the Criminals Channel? Barry asked. It's completely different, Bridget insisted. TV shows focus on old crimes and only feature the guilty. I want to cover a case as it unfolds, showing what the accused goes through. She paused. Have you read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote? When Barry shook his head, she continued. It's a groundbreaking nonfiction crime book. Capote had deep access to the butchers, revealing their thoughts and dynamics. I want to take it further, follow a case from the start and find the truth as it happens. And what does that mean for me? Barry asked. Everything, Bridget said. This would bring major media attention. People would know not only that you were cleared, but also what you endured. They'd be apologizing and welcoming you back. Barry studied her, then said, There's one problem. What if I'm guilty? Bridget, surprised, composed herself. Then I'll visit you in prison. Barry stared at her, glanced at the news story, then nodded and offered his hand. All right, Bridget, you have a deal. Hey, sis, he agreed to let me write his story. He's willing to share everything. This could be my big break. Congrats, BG. What's your impression of him after meeting in person? He's smart and successful, though the recession hit him hard. and now the suspicion around his wife's death is hurting him more. That's not what I mean. Do you think he's guilty? You're always the cop, Jill. Honestly, I'm not sure. At first, I thought he was innocent. He seemed genuinely upset when talking about his wife, but then he asked, "What if I'm guilty? Why would an innocent man say that? I'll be spending the day with him tomorrow and hope to learn more." Jill was silent, then said, "Be careful, Bridget. It's odd he'd even bring up his guilt if he were innocent. Maybe it's a weird sense of humor, but it's concerning." "Yeah, I get it. I'll be careful. I'll update you tomorrow." Bridget mentioned that she hoped she wasn't keeping Barry from his clients as she settled on the couch in his office. Barry, sounding bitter, assured her not to worry and explained that, since the newspaper article, the only calls he had received were from clients canceling their services. He expressed his disbelief at how quickly people judged, adding with a wry smile that, without her, he would have no one to talk to. Bridget, offering a sympathetic look, glanced down at her notes and suggested they get started, asking him to tell her about himself. Barry leaned back, sipping his coffee, and said there wasn't much to tell. He shared that he was born and raised in Richmond, except for his college years at UVA in Charlottesville, where he majored in finance. He had planned to pursue an MBA, but accepted a promising job offer from a major financial firm and discovered he had a knack for financial planning, which convinced him not to go back for an advanced degree. He went on to explain that after a few years, he decided to start his own practice, though the recession later hit hard. Bridget, recording and taking notes, inquired why he chose to branch out on his own and asked if he had always wanted to be his own boss. Barry admitted that was part of it, but added that his first marriage ending was also a factor. Seeing Bridget raise an eyebrow, Barry continued, explaining that he and his first wife were high school sweethearts who both attended UVA. They married right after graduation, but realized they had grown into very different people. While she pursued a drama degree and became heavily involved in various causes, Barry, being more pragmatic and numbers-oriented, found they were no longer compatible. They divorced amicably after a couple of years. When Bridget asked if he had to pay alimony, Barry, smiling slightly, said he was fortunate as she believed alimony was outdated. His only obligation was paying for her MFA tuition, which depleted his savings but ended his financial responsibility. He mentioned they were still friendly, and that she even sent him cards for his birthday and Christmas. Bridget, adding more notes, summarized that Barry had been in his mid-20s, divorced, employed, but essentially broke. Barry agreed, noting that it was an ideal time to take the leap and start his own agency, since he had no dependents or obligations. He worked hard, caught a few breaks, and things improved, especially after he met Kelly. Bridget straightened and asked how they met. Barry, looking slightly embarrassed, admitted they met through an online dating service, explaining that meeting eligible women after college was tough due to his 70 to 80-hour work weeks. Kelly had actually contacted him first. Barry shared that they clicked immediately, finding they had shared values, attitudes, and interests. Both had similar backgrounds. Kelly had left a bad marriage in Atlanta and moved to Richmond for a fresh start, preferring a smaller city as he did. Bridget asked how long they dated before marrying, and Barry blushed, saying they tied the knot after just 6 months. Although it sounded quick, he said they both knew what they wanted. He added, stretching his hands as if pleading, that Bridget had probably seen Kelly's pictures and knew how beautiful she was. But it was her intelligence, values, and style that drew him in. Barry shared that Kelly had even suggested a prenuptial agreement to protect their assets, showing her practicality, which he deeply respected. Slumping back in his seat, Barry concluded that he would never find another like her. That evening, Bridget was reflective as she spoke to her sister. She admitted, "I know I should stay detached, but I can't help liking him. He doesn't seem like someone who would eliminate his wife." Jill's voice turned serious and instructive. She asked, "Do you know what a sociopath is?" Bridget snapped back, "Of course, and Barry isn't one. He's intelligent and caring, dealing with a terrible loss while being unfairly accused. He doesn't show any signs of delusion." Jill countered, "That doesn't rule out being a sociopath. Sociopaths often have traits like charm, intelligence, rational thinking, unreliability, insincerity, lack of remorse, and antisocial behavior." "Where did you get that?" Bridget asked. Jill explained, "From The Mask of Sanity by Hervey Cleckley. It's a classic on psychopathic behavior." Bridget fiercely responded, "Those traits could describe many normal people, and just because he isn't irrational doesn't mean he's dangerous. Plus, you don't know that Barry has traits like dishonesty or antisocial behavior. Calm down, BG. I'm not accusing him. I just want you to stay alert. If he is a sociopath, he could be manipulative. Just keep your eyes open and stay safe." Bridget sighed. "All right, I'll be careful. I promise." The next afternoon, as Bridget prepared to visit Barry, her phone rang. It was Jill. "I'm glad I caught you," Jill said quickly. "Last night we overlooked something important. Didn't you mention that Barry and Kelly had a prenup?" "Yes," Bridget replied. "But why does that matter?" "Did he say who wanted the prenup?" Jill pressed. "I don't think he did." "Why is that important?" Bridget asked, puzzled. "Think about it," Jill said urgently. "It could be the motive. If Barry's business is failing and he needs money, he wouldn't get access to Kelly's funds through divorce because of the prenup. But if she died, he'd inherit everything. It's the oldest motive, money." Bridget was silent for a moment. Jill pushed. "What do you think, BG?" Bridget admitted, "I hadn't considered that. I need to look into it." She added quickly, "I'm running late. I'll call you later." "Stay sharp," Jill warned before Bridget hung up. As she drove to Barry's, Bridget's thoughts raced. Could he really be the murderer? Could this all be driven by greed? She reminded herself that Capote's butchers were also driven by theft, and it didn't make the story any less impactful. Yet the idea that Barry might be guilty left her feeling disappointed. He just doesn't seem like the type, she thought sadly. Barry was working on a spreadsheet when Bridget arrived. Seeing her expression, he immediately sensed something was off. He asked what was wrong. Bridget, still standing, took a deep breath and told him that something he mentioned yesterday could be seen as a motive for murder. Barry looked puzzled, so she explained that their prenuptial agreement meant he couldn't access Kelly's premarital assets unless he inherited them after her death. Barry stared at her for a moment before bursting into laughter. He reassured her there was no need for such concerns, explaining that Kelly had planned to lend him money for his business, and they even had a contract with terms. Although unsure where it was, he said he could find it if needed. He added that they were supposed to sign the contract the night she was eliminated. Barry sat heavily on the couch, recalling his last moment with Kelly. Bridget, relieved, apologized for suspecting him, but said she had to explore all angles in the confusing case. Barry understood, saying she was just doing her job, and that he appreciated she didn't want him to be guilty. She gave a small, embarrassed smile. Barry stood up, suggesting they take a break from the stress and enjoy the nice weather. Bridget agreed, and they headed to his car. When she asked where they were going, he just smiled and told her to be patient. She briefly worried he might be heading to the farm where Kelly had died, but he drove north instead, to the Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden. Bridget was surprised, but pleased, admitting she hadn't expected that. Barry led her along the garden's winding paths, and they spent the afternoon exploring. At the Asian Valley, they sat on a bench by a pond under Japanese maples, enjoying the peaceful setting. Barry mentioned he liked visiting the garden when he needed to think. As they returned to the car, evening shadows stretched across the ground. Barry apologized for keeping her so long, but Bridget dismissed it, saying it was the first time in a while she had truly relaxed and enjoyed herself. Barry asked if she had plans for the evening, and when she said no, he invited her to dinner, with the condition that they avoid any talk about crime or Kelly. Bridget smiled and agreed. Barry drove them to Bookbinders, a restaurant by the James River. They sat on the patio and shared a bottle of wine, discussing the garden and other places in Richmond Bridget might enjoy. The conversation flowed, with Barry sharing funny stories from college and starting his business. Walking back to the car, Barry offered his jacket when the air turned cooler, and Bridget gratefully accepted. He drove her across the 14th Street Bridge and then north on 301 for a view of the city lights from the Robert E. Lee Bridge. Back at Barry's office, he invited Bridget in for coffee. Still chilled, she agreed. As they sipped, Barry's expression turned awkward, prompting Bridget to ask what was wrong. Barry, realizing he'd talked about himself all evening, apologized, saying he must seem self-absorbed. Bridget laughed, reassuring him she didn't mind, and that learning about him was part of her job for the book. Barry smiled and said it was now his turn to learn about her. Bridget brushed it off, saying there wasn't much to tell, as she was so focused on work that there wasn't room for much else. Barry asked if she had siblings, and she mentioned her older sister, Jill, a detective in D.C. He remarked on how interesting it was that they both pursued criminal justice, though in different ways. Bridget's smile faded as she admitted Jill's career had influenced her. Barry pressed, asking if their father had been a policeman. Bridget grew silent and pale, then began to cry, recalling a traumatic memory. She explained that when she was in 7th grade, she came home to find the door open, which was unusual. She called for her mother, but got no response. The living room was in disarray, and there was blood on the floor. Trembling, she peeked into her parents' room and saw her mother's foot sticking out from behind the bed. Bridget described how she discovered her mother's body, torn clothing, and a wound. She sobbed as she recounted calling out to her mother and Jill arriving, pulling her out of the room and calling 911. Barry, shocked and pale, moved closer and comforted her as she revealed the aftermath. Their father's breakdown when he saw what had happened, and his grief-driven self-destruction that night. Bridget explained how people later called her father selfish, but she believed that the man who hurt her mother had also destroyed her father. Through tears, Bridget told Barry how Jill, at 18, became her legal guardian, saving them from foster care. They managed with life insurance and Social Security. Jill's experience led her to become a police officer, while Bridget's focus on criminals came from the same tragedy, although she chose a different path. Bridget buried her face in Barry's shoulder, still overwhelmed by the memories, while Barry held her, deeply affected by her story. Barry embraced her, gently rubbing her back like a parent would comfort a mourning child. "I'm so sorry, Bridget. I don't know what to say." He spoke softly. After a moment, he whispered, "I suppose we both know what it's like to lose someone we love to violence." Surprised, she pulled back to look at him and noticed a reflection of her own pain mirrored in his expression. In her grief, she'd forgotten he had recently lost his wife. She pulled him close again, and they held each other tightly, both lost in their sorrow. After a while, they both calmed, and Bridget leaned back to meet Barry's eyes. She moved forward and kissed him gently on the lips. He returned her kiss with warmth and gratitude. When she pulled back this time, determination filled her gaze. She leaned in once more, but this time her kiss was filled with promise. The raw emotion she had felt transformed into passion, and her lips parted as she deepened the kiss. Almost instantly, the heat between them intensified, and they embraced passionately, like lovers reunited after a long absence. Barry pulled back and held her at arm's length. "Are you sure, Bridget?" he asked. Without a moment's doubt, she replied, "I'm as sure as I've ever been." He brought her back into his arms and kissed her fervently on the lips, eyes, and neck. Suddenly, he swept her into his arms and carried her to the master bedroom, laying her down and lying beside her. They began undressing each other between kisses, urgently trying to remove all obstacles between them. But as Barry pulled at her knit top, he sensed a hesitation in her movements, and when his hand brushed over her stomach, he felt the tension in her muscles. "What's wrong, Bridget?" he asked with concern. "Do you want me to stop?" He pulled his hand away, but she took it and guided it back to her chest. "No, don't stop," she said. "It's just that I've never done this before." She looked away, embarrassed, as he stared at her in surprise. After a moment, he kissed her softly. "That's okay," he reassured her gently. "I know how to take care of you." He stood and undressed to his boxer briefs, then helped her out of her clothes. As he slipped off her skirt, he almost chuckled when he noticed her playful polka-dot underwear. He asked her to turn onto her stomach on the bed. Straddling her hips, he began to rub her back and neck in long, soothing motions. Within minutes, he felt the tension leave her body, and she made a contented sound as he worked. When he felt she was relaxed enough, he moved lower and massaged her hips. Though he avoided any intimate touches, the pressure felt good, and soon he could sense her arousal. When his hand moved away, she sighed, but the sound turned to pleasure as he caressed her abdomen. He shifted back to run his hands along her legs, bending her knees and positioning her to lie open before him. Seeing the signs of her desire, he teased her inner thighs, making her moan and lift her hips. When he pulled back, she groaned in frustration. He repeated this, building anticipation until her body moved restlessly, seeking more. Suddenly, her eyes opened wide with desperation. "Please, don't make me wait any longer. I need you." He slipped off his boxer briefs and positioned himself between her legs. After a moment of hesitation and initial discomfort, he reassured her until they moved together in a rhythm that turned tentative into comforting. Soon, their shared warmth and connection deepened, blending trust with newfound passion. When she looked up at him, eyes full of wonder, a gentle smile spread as comfort replaced uncertainty, and they continued together, connected and assured. Barry noticed her hesitation and gently shifted her on top, encouraging her to set the pace and focus on what felt right. Bridget adjusted and began to move, gradually gaining confidence as their connection deepened. Their shared intensity grew, with Barry supporting and responding to her lead. The room filled with the sounds of their mutual passion until they both reached a powerful climax. Bridget, overwhelmed by the experience, collapsed onto his chest, and they lay together, breathing heavily. Moments later, she rolled to his side, and they rested in a comfortable silence, satisfied and close. After a moment, she rolled onto her back, still breathing heavily. Barry got out of bed and went to the bathroom, returning with a wet cloth and towel for her. Once she was done, He joined her under the covers, and they both fell asleep. The morning sun woke Barry, and he turned to look at his alarm clock, surprised to see he had overslept. As the events of the previous night came back to him, he turned to find Bridget, but she was gone. He scanned the room and checked the bathroom, but found nothing. Back at the bed, he noticed a note on the pillow she'd used. "Hey, sleepyhead. I had an early appointment, so I let myself out. Bridget, P.S. I'll call you. P.P.S. You snore. P.P.P.S. last night. Wow. Hey, Jill, sorry I didn't call you last night. Where were you? I got worried when you didn't call. Sorry, sis, but something amazing happened. What did you do, BG? Wait, oh my gosh, you were with him. I can hear it in your voice. I never could keep secrets from you. It's like you can read my mind. Are you serious? I can't believe you let that happen. Do you know the risk you took? He could have hurt you, just like what happened to Mom. No, Jill, it wasn't like that. He didn't push me into anything. If anything, I started it. We were talking about Mom. You told him about her? Why would you do that, BG? We were talking about our pasts and everything just came out. I was crying, he comforted me, and when I calmed down, I remembered his wife was also murdered. Then I wanted to comfort him, and things got intense. Now I'm not a maid anymore. So he took advantage when you were emotionally vulnerable? No, not at all. He was gentle, kind, and loving. I felt completely safe. I don't think he could ever be violent. Listen, Bridget Callahan, no matter how you feel, the fact is someone murdered his wife and he's still a suspect. Plus, he has every reason to charm you since you're writing a book that could clear his name. Of course he wants you to trust him. I understand your point, but you don't know him like I do. Anyway, before you start another lecture, I promise to be cautious and stay in touch. Pinky promise, sis. All right, BG, just don't forget. If anything happened to you, I don't know what I'd do. I feel the same way about you. Mid-morning, Barry answered the phone, hoping it was a potential client. Instead, a muffled voice said, "Is this Barry Russell?" "Yes, I'm Barry Russell." "The Barry Russell who was married to Kelly Russell?" "Yes." "What's this about?" "You think your wife was perfect, but she was nothing more than a common cheater." "What? Who is this? You have no right to insult my late wife." "It's no insult, just the truth, Russell. Don't believe me? She was with Bill McAvoy right under your nose." "Bill McAvoy? Kelly didn't even know him, and she'd never do anything like that. Ask her friends. I bet they all knew. Some probably even helped her keep it from you. Listen, whoever you are, and while you're mourning her, they're probably laughing at you behind your back." "Who are you?" Barry shouted, but the line had already disconnected. Minutes later, Barry was on his way to Jared and Susan Jackson's house. Susan, one of Kelly's closest friends, answered the door. "Oh, Barry, you startled me. If you're looking for Jared, he's at work," she said nervously. "I actually need to talk to you, Susan. May I come in?" he asked coldly. "Of course," she said quickly. "I'm sorry we haven't visited since the funeral. Things have been so hectic." He raised a hand to stop her. Knowing Susan would defend Kelly if asked directly, he took a more direct approach. Crossing his arms, he stared at her intently. "How long did you know about Kelly and Bill McAvoy?" he demanded. He saw her eyes widen, and she was silent for a moment, clearly searching for words. That pause told him enough. The caller was right. The surge of adrenaline faded, and he sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "What about Kelly and Bill?" Susan asked weakly. "Please, don't lie to me, Susan. It's too late for that," he said. Susan sat across from him, nervously wringing her hands. "Barry, I don't know what to say." "Just answer. How long did it last?" Her eyes darted around, but finding no escape, she sighed. "I don't know, maybe 6 months." "6 months!" Barry shouted, and she flinched. "How could you not tell me?" "I tried to warn her, Barry. I told her it was dangerous, but she wouldn't listen." Remembering the caller's words, Barry asked, "Who else knew?" "Eventually, most of us," Susan admitted reluctantly. "Kelly barely tried to hide it. Some even wondered if you knew and accepted it." "You know me better than that!" Barry shouted angrily. "I would never allow that." Susan paled and shrank back into her chair. Barry calmed himself, sadness overtaking his anger. "Why didn't you tell me, Susan? 6 months and you said nothing?" "I couldn't, Barry. She was my friend." He stood, eyes cold. "I thought you were my friend, too." "Thanks for nothing." He walked out, leaving Susan shaken as she reached for her phone to call others. Late that afternoon, Bridget arrived at Barry's house and rang the doorbell. When he opened the door, she was taken aback to see him holding a bag of frozen peas against his eye. "Barry, what happened?" she exclaimed. "I got into a fight," he said, guiding her into his office. "A fight?" Bridget repeated, stunned. "That's so unlike you." Barry explained everything, starting from the anonymous phone call to his confrontation with Susan Jackson. After Susan confirmed what I feared, I went straight to McAvoy's office. The guy inherited a fortune when his wife passed away from cancer and now spends his days managing investments. He was in a meeting when I walked in, but I interrupted them. When I introduced myself, he looked shocked at first, but then he smirked. I couldn't help myself. I hit him. He attempted a smile, but the pain in his eye made him wince. Turns out his assistant knows martial arts. They dragged me out, and McAvoy threatened to call the police if I returned. Bridget was shocked. "Barry, you committed attack. He could have you arrested." "I doubt he'll press charges given the reason I confronted him. Besides, I'm the one who walked away with an injury." Bridget frowned. "You don't seem very remorseful for someone who just started a fight." Barry's expression darkened. "I don't even know how to feel right now. I've been mourning my wife's death, only to find out she was cheating on me the entire time. How do I feel? I'm angry, hurt, confused, and I don't regret going after the guy she was involved with." Bridget flinched at his outburst, but sympathy welled up inside her as she tried to grasp the turmoil he was facing. "Barry, I'm so sorry this happened. I can't imagine what you're going through." She reached for his hand. "Would you like some company tonight just to talk?" He shook his head, wincing from the pain. "Honestly, I need time alone to sort this out. It's overwhelming to realize that everything I believed was a lie." He took her hands in his eyes full of intensity. "I can't believe she betrayed me. And I can't believe all my so-called friends knew and kept it from me. The fact that they knew and said nothing makes it even worse. Kelly acted like it didn't matter if I found out, as if she had no respect for me. That makes me furious." As he spoke, his grip on her hands tightened until Bridget cried out, "Barry, you're hurting me." He immediately let go and apologized. "I'm sorry, Bridget. I didn't realize. This is why I need to be alone tonight." She nodded and gently touched his face. "I'll call you tomorrow to check in," she promised, turning to leave. As she drove away, worry etched her brow. "I've never seen that side of him before," she thought. "Hey, sis, it's me." "What's wrong, BG? Yesterday you sounded like you were on top of the world. Tonight it's like you're carrying the weight of the world. What's going on?" "Jill, I'm really confused about Barry. Let me tell you what happened today." Bridget then shared everything that happened, including Barry's confrontation with Bill McAvoy and the anger she saw in him. "It was like he turned into a different person, sis. The rage in him was something I'd never seen before. It was a little scary." "Wow, that's quite a story, and it raises some interesting questions. What if Kelly's murder wasn't about money, but jealousy? You know as well as I do how many husbands kill their wives over that." "But that can't be it, sis. He only found out about her cheating today." "We don't know that for sure, BG. All we know is that he confirmed today who she was cheating with. What if he found out about her being unfaithful before today? What if he was the one who lured her to that farmhouse and liquidated her out of jealousy?" "I don't know, sis. He didn't seem that way when I talked to him this afternoon." "Exactly, BG. He's acting. That's what I've been trying to warn you about. Men like him can be really convincing." "I hear you, but I still don't think that's the case." "All right, but while you're considering that, let me give you something else to think about. I've been doing some digging from up here, and it turns out that being faithful wasn't the only thing Kelly lied about." "What do you mean, Jill?" "Kelly Russell's background is more complicated than Barry ever told you. I'd even guess it's more complicated than he knows. I traced her past, and here's what I found. She came from a poor family in Florala, Alabama, a small town right on the Alabama-Florida border. She attended Florala High School and was a cheerleader for the Wildcats. She also started dating Johnny Rayburn back then. After high school, she and Johnny both attended Jefferson Davis Community College in Brewton, Alabama. Eventually, they got married." "Really?" Bridget said. "I'm sure Barry has no idea about that." "Wait, there's more. She left Rayburn after a year or two and moved to Atlanta. She must have been quite attractive because she met her next husband while working as a bartender at Coyote Ugly. He was a contractor making good money during the construction boom in Atlanta. They got married quickly, but after just a few years, he died suddenly of a heart attack. After that, she moved to Richmond, and that's where she met Barry." "Wow, she really had quite a life." "There's one more thing, BG. The contractor's family in Atlanta never liked Kelly, and they didn't believe he had heart issues. They've been pressuring the police and courts to reopen the investigation into his death." "Huh, that's all interesting, Jill, and it'll definitely add to my book, but I'm not sure how it fits into what's happening now. Do you think someone in the contractor's family could be the butcher?" "I'm not sure, BG. I'm just trying to help you gather enough clues to piece this together. But one thing's for sure, don't let your guard down around Barry Russell. He now has two potential motives for eliminating his wife, and that's more than anyone else we know of. No matter how charming he seems or how good things were between you, Stay cautious. Promise me? Well, you don't need to worry for now. I have interviews lined up for the next 2 days with others who knew both Barry and Kelly, so I won't be seeing him anytime soon. Despite being busy over the next 2 days, Bridget couldn't stop thinking about Barry. His confrontation with Kelly's lover unsettled her, and she took her sister's warnings seriously. Still, she couldn't shake the emotions that had emerged after their night together. She longed to reconnect and understand what was truly happening, so it stung when he didn't call. On the third day, she was excited to see a missed call from him. But as she listened to his long message, her excitement turned into worry. "Bridget, I just got a call from the same person who told me about Kelly's affair. It sounded like a man, but the voice was muffled, just like before. He claims to have information about who liquidated Kelly and wants to meet at Palmer's barn today at 5 o'clock. I have to go alone or I won't find out the truth. I know it's risky, but I need to do this. If I discover what happened, you'll be able to finish your book. And if I don't come back, at least you'll know where to tell the police to look." The message ended. Bridget felt torn. Like Barry, she wanted answers about Kelly Russell's murder. It was clear the caller knew a lot about Barry's late wife, perhaps enough to solve the case. But she was also deeply worried for Barry. Going alone to the place where his wife had been eliminated seemed dangerous. She wanted to get Jill's advice but couldn't reach her at the station. When she tried Jill's cell, it went straight to voicemail. Hearing her sister's voice on the recording seemed to solidify Bridget's decision, and she left a detailed message explaining what happened and her plan. After hanging up, she tried calling Barry, only to find her phone battery had died. Frustrated, she tossed it into her bag. "If I get to the farm early, I can see who meets Barry," she thought. "I'll deal with charging my phone later." Just minutes later, Jill returned to the station. "Hey," the sergeant called to her. "Your sister left a message while you were out." Jill turned on her phone, and the message light appeared once it connected to the network. When she listened to Bridget's message, a chill ran down her spine. She quickly dialed her sister, but it went to voicemail. "Bridget, it's me. Do not go to that barn. Do you hear me? It's a trap. There was no anonymous call. Barry made it up to lure you there. He's going to kill you like he did his wife. Call me as soon as you get this, but whatever you do, don't go." After hanging up, she called the Richmond police and asked for the detective in charge of the Russell case. When he wasn't available, she spoke to the sergeant on duty and explained her fears. Although he didn't seem to grasp the urgency, he promised to send a patrol car to the farm. Jill hung up, frustrated that the gravity of the situation hadn't registered. "God, what do I do now?" she whispered anxiously. Once Bridget passed Route 288, traffic on Anderson Highway was nearly non-existent, and she felt confident she would reach the Palmer farm in time to find a good hiding spot to watch Barry's meeting with the mysterious caller. But her confidence vanished when a loud pop and the sluggish response of the steering wheel signaled a flat tire. "This can't be happening," she muttered as she pulled the rental car onto the highway shoulder. "This is exactly what happened to Barry when Kelly was liquidated." She stepped out and walked around to the right front wheel, staring at it helplessly. She'd never changed a tire before. Barry carefully pushed the barn door open with the barrel of his father's old Winchester. He hadn't used the tool since going hunting with his father years ago, but he wasn't going to step into the barn without some form of protection. The dim interior was lit only by narrow beams of light piercing through holes in the corrugated tin roof. Barry scanned the space and saw that it appeared empty. "Good," he thought. "I made it here first." He noticed some old hay bales to one side and settled behind them, positioning himself to watch the entrance for any arrivals. Bridget left the flat tire on the roadside and threw the jack back into the trunk without securing it. She climbed into the driver's seat and pulled back onto the highway, hoping she had put the spare tire on correctly. "Please let me get to that barn in time," she thought anxiously. Barry's eyes had adjusted to the dimness, and in the silence he could hear every creak and groan the old barn made when the wind pressed against it. Because of this, he picked up the faint sound of a footstep behind him. Before he could turn, a sharp blow to the back of his head sent him into darkness. The pain in his head brought him back to consciousness. When he lifted his head off the ground, nausea washed over him, and he turned to the side to vomit. Definitely a concussion, he thought numbly. The pain returned as he tried to touch his head, only to find his hands and feet bound. His fingers traced over dusty leather, and he realized he was tied up with the old reins he had noticed hanging from the barn wall. Part of him was surprised he could think so clearly, given the pain in his head. He then heard a new sound and slowly lifted his head to look at the barn door. It creaked open, and a shadowy figure stepped inside. "Well, well," said a man's voice. "Looks like you followed instructions and didn't bring anyone with you." Barry struggled to sit up, managing it despite a fresh wave of pain shooting through his head. He gasped, then focused on the figure speaking to him. It was a man, but Barry was sure he'd never seen him before. "Who are you?" Barry groaned, struggling through the pain. "Oh, that's right. We haven't been properly introduced," the figure said mockingly. "You don't know me. I'm Kelly's husband." Barry stared at him, bewildered. "But I'm her husband," he mumbled. "No," the man said. "You were just her latest victim." Barry wondered if the hit to his head had done more damage than he thought. "So you're the guy she was married to in Atlanta?" He tried again. No, the man snapped. "I'm Johnny Rayburn, her real husband." Seeing Barry's blank expression, he started pacing in front of him. "Kelly was my high school sweetheart in Florala, and we got married while attending Jeff Davis. But when the economy went bad, I couldn't find a decent job. Kelly always had a taste for nice things I couldn't give her. Eventually she left, probably looking for something better. It took me a while, but I finally found her in Atlanta, working at some dive. She said she was happy to see me, but by then she'd latched onto some wealthy contractor who could give her everything she wanted. She told me she had a plan for us to be together again, but I had to stay out of sight until she could get him to marry her. He did marry her, of course. No one could resist Kelly. After a while, she called me to help with her plan. One night, after giving him some extra affection, she waited until he was lying there, exhausted and half asleep. I sneaked in and jumped on his chest. Rayburn chuckled darkly. He couldn't even move his arms from under the covers. You should have seen his face before I pressed the pillow down on him. After I finished and left, Kelly acted like nothing happened. She laid down beside him and slept there until morning, so it would look like he died naturally in his sleep. He shook his head. I don't know if I could have done that. But it didn't bother her at all. Rayburn's expression darkened. But I guess he had the last laugh. Turns out he was deep in debt, and Kelly barely got anything after he died. She told me she needed to find another rich guy before we could be together again. Things got a little too risky in Atlanta, so she decided to move. Even through his pain, Barry managed to say, and that's when she moved to Richmond and found me. Rayburn let out a mocking laugh. Yeah, Barry Russell, the big money guy. But you turned out to be another letdown. When your business started tanking, Kelly decided not to wait around for the next opportunity. I suppose that's when Bill McAvoy entered the picture, Barry said, bitterness in his voice. Exactly, genius. But she needed to get rid of you first, so she called me. But why liquidate me? Barry argued. She could have just divorced me and gone straight to McAvoy. Rayburn looked at Barry as if he were clueless. She had to get something out of it, didn't she? With that prenup in place, the only way she'd see any money was if you died. Barry was still trying to piece it together. But Kelly ended up dead, not me. Rayburn's face twisted with anger and regret. The plan was set. I was hiding here in the barn, waiting for you to come in so I could shoot you as the unknown assailant. But you never showed. Suddenly, Kelly burst through that door to find out what was going on, and I ended her by mistake. It's all your fault. Rayburn waved his Colt in Barry's face, and Barry frantically searched for any way to stall or distract him. He tried, but in his weakened state, his attempts to free his hands were futile. Johnny, you don't have to do this. Eliminating me won't change anything now. Just leave me here and run while you can, Barry pleaded. Rayburn paced back and forth, agitated. No, I have to finish this. She loved me. I have to do what she wanted. Just as Rayburn started to lift his magnum again, a voice called from outside. Barry, are you in there? Are you okay? Before Barry could shout a warning, Bridget burst into the barn, freezing in shock as she saw Johnny Rayburn aim his tool at her. So you did bring a friend, he said with a smirk. And a pretty one, too. Looks like I have two to deal with now. He looked Bridget up and down, a wicked smile spreading across his face. But first, I'm going to have some fun. It's been a while since I've had a woman. No! Bridget screamed, tears streaming down her face. Stay away from me! Rayburn ignored her, tucking the tool into his belt behind him as he moved toward her. Barry's heart sank as he remembered Bridget's past trauma. She must be terrified, he thought helplessly. Get away from her, he shouted, but Rayburn didn't even flinch. Then, as Barry watched in horror, he noticed something unexpected in Bridget's eyes. That's not fear, he realized. That's anger. As Rayburn reached out for her, he taunted, I'm going to enjoy this. Bridget shouted loudly, Not this time! To Rayburn's and Barry's shock, she reached behind her, pulled out a snub-nosed .38, and fired. The shot hit Rayburn in the midsection, making him double over before he fell backward onto the straw-covered ground, groaning in pain. Bridget stood staring at him for a moment, then ran to Barry, kneeling beside him as she cried and hugged him. Are you okay, Barry? She asked urgently. My head's liquidating me, he said, but I'll be fine. Thank God you're safe. Can you help untie my hands? As she worked on his bonds, a voice called out, "Bridget! Bridget!" They looked up to see a woman entering the barn, holding a Colt in the classic two-handed weaver stance. "Jill!" Bridget screamed, running to embrace her sister. They hugged tightly, tears of relief streaming down their faces. After a moment, Bridget asked, "How did you get here?" Jill held her close. "When I heard your voicemail, I drove straight from D.C. with the police cruiser's siren blaring the whole way. I promised I'd never let anything happen to you." As Bridget hugged her gratefully, Jill glanced suspiciously at Barry and the figure on the floor. "What did Barry do? And who's that man?" "Oh, I almost forgot about Barry," Bridget exclaimed. She pulled Jill toward him. "Help me untie him." While the sisters worked to untie Barry from the old leather reins, Barry noticed movement from Rayburn on the floor and shouted, "That's Johnny Rayburn. He has a Colt in his waistband." Jill swiftly approached Rayburn, rolled him over, and found the Colt still tucked in his belt. She took it and placed it in her own. Rayburn let out a terrible cry, and Jill turned him over again to check his injury. She grabbed her phone and called 911, requesting an ambulance and the police. When she returned to Barry, he said, "If you check the ballistics on that Magnum, I'm sure it will match the one used to liquidate Kelly." Jill looked from Barry to Bridget. "So, her first husband was behind all of this?" Barry nodded. "And from what he said, I doubt they were ever legally divorced." He glanced at Rayburn, noting how pale he had become. "How is he asked Jill. In a quiet voice, she replied, "He's losing a lot of blood. There's not much I can do for a stomach wound. I don't think he'll make it until the EMTs arrive." Bridget whimpered softly, and Jill hugged her. "It's okay, BG. You did what you had to. I'm proud of you." Barry gave Bridget a confused look. "I didn't know you had a tool. Where did that come from?" Bridget shrugged, a bit embarrassed. "Jill gave it to me years ago. After what happened to Mom, I've always hated Colts, but Jill insisted I carry one for protection. I've kept it in my purse all this time, but this was the first time I ever used it." Just then, Johnny Rayburn groaned again. The three of them moved over and knelt by his side. He opened his eyes and, seeing Barry, spoke in a strained voice. "I lied to you. It wasn't an accident. When she came into the barn and realized you weren't here, she got mad. I begged her to forget the plan and leave with me. That's when she said she didn't love me and would never take me back. Then she laughed and I ended her." Barry, Bridget, and Jill exchanged looks. Rayburn's voice grew weaker. Barry noticed that speaking had caused more trouble. To their surprise, Rayburn began to laugh. "You can't escape me this time, Kelly. I know where you've gone, and I'm coming too." He let out one last laugh before his head fell back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Jill reached out to check his carotid artery and then shook her head, closing his eyelids. While waiting for the EMTs and police, Barry recounted everything Rayburn had confessed, and Jill added what she had discovered in her research. When the medical team arrived and decided Barry should go to the hospital for observation, Bridget insisted on following him in her car. Jill offered to stay behind to explain everything to the police. As Barry was secured on the gurney for the ride back to Richmond, Bridget kissed him before heading to her car. Jill came over and patted his arm. "I owe you an apology, Barry. I was convinced you were a sociopath, that you'd eliminated Kelly and might hurt Bridget too. But it turns out Kelly was the real sociopath, and her first husband was her butcher. I'm sorry for doubting you." Barry smiled. "No worries, Jill. I get it." Jill looked at him seriously. "Just don't ever do anything to hurt my little sister." Barry glanced at the attendants loading Johnny Rayburn's body into the other ambulance, then looked back at Jill and shook his head. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said.